Okay, so I think we can turn out the lights and spend, I would watch the whole piece, which is about 20 minutes.
Đất nước Việt Nam mình có cái đặc biệt là có người thứ nhất lãnh đạo đất nước là Bác Hồ. Bác Hồ lại là bạn của Picasso. Bác Hồ là bạn của một họa sĩ nổi tiếng của Đảng Cộng sản Ý. Thế là gì bác quên rồi. Mà ông là họa sĩ rất giỏi của Ý, rất là hiện đại. Bác Hồ là một cái họa sĩ mà sang Trung Quốc thì bà đã biết là những nhân vật như là Tề Bạch Hạch, như là họa sĩ như là cụ gì mà học ở bên Pháp về cụ bên Pháp này, cụ vẽ ngựa rất giỏi, cụ Thư Bích Hồng. Bác Hồ tất cả những nhân vật nghệ thuật Bác Hồ không lạ lùng gì cả. Bác Hồ không lạ lùng.
Picasso mất thì nhà nước ta gửi điện chia buồn. Thì tôi biết là như thế là Picasso là một người đảng viên cộng sản và là bạn của Hồ Chí Minh từ hồi những năm Bắc và lập Pháp. Đó là một thế như thế là Hồ Chí Minh biết vẽ rất đẹp. Ta xem một số tác phẩm Hồ Chí Minh tự vẽ, biển sách, tranh đã kích nét sắc đẹp. Đó là con người rất tài hoa về làm thơ rồi hội họa.
Ngay từ thời Bác Hồ đã rất là coi trọng nghệ thuật rồi. Các cụ biên bác đó, các lãnh tụ cái thời mà người ta cứ gọi là tứ trụ triều đình là cụ Hồ, cụ Trinh, cụ Đặng, cụ Nhạc, 4 cột trụ. Những cái cột trụ là những cái nhà văn hóa lớn. Bác Hồ cũng rất quan tâm đến nghệ thuật. Bác Hồ đã viết một cái thư, tôi không nhớ rõ là lúc nào, viết thư cho văn nghệ sĩ. Trong đó có một câu bác nói là văn nghệ sĩ cũng là chiến sĩ. Đảng ta chủ trương mà Bác Hồ hay là các đồng chí lãnh đạo cao nhất của nhà nước ta chủ trương là văn nghệ sĩ cũng là một chiến sĩ. Và vũ khí của văn nghệ sĩ là ngọn bút, là bút vẽ, là màu sắc, là các thứ, là cây đàn, là giọng hát.
Những người văn nghệ sĩ yêu nước thì phải là những người mà là chiến sĩ trên mặt trận tư tưởng và văn hóa. Tức là người ta cầm súng, người bộ đội thì cầm súng, người nông dân thì cấy gậy để ra hạt lúa, người công nhân thì rèn đúc vũ khí và làm ra các công cụ sinh hoạt. Thì người họa sĩ phải là một chiến sĩ, nhưng chiến sĩ không phải là chiến sĩ cầm súng. Cũng có những người cầm súng, nhưng chính là chiến sĩ của những người cầm bút. Nhưng mà cầm bút trên mặt trận nào? Trên mặt trận tư tưởng và văn hóa. Thế thì chính vì hiểu như vậy, thế nên là nhiều họa sĩ mà trong đó có tôi cũng muốn mình không giỏi bắn súng mà mình giỏi thứ khác thì mình làm thứ khác. Nhưng mà cũng có những người mà kể cả họa sĩ anh ạ, rất nhiều họa sĩ trực tiếp cầm súng ra chiến trường. Ví dụ như là Leverhulme là một trong những người. Leverhulme về sau là đại tá quân đội và bị mù mắt đấy. Thế thì đấy là anh ấy trực tiếp cầm súng ra chiến trường. Thế nhưng mà ra chiến trường thì nó lại như thế này. Khi ra chiến trường ấy, thì không phải là anh ấy chỉ biết bắn súng, nhưng mà khi bắn xong thì đến lúc mà thấy cái bọn địch nó đánh rơi cái máy quay phim Thế là anh cướp về để anh quay. Thế anh quay anh nó mới bắn cho mình. Thế thì như thế tức là trong lúc cầm súng mà vẫn nghĩ đến nghệ thuật.
Thế thì trong những người lính như thế thì nó xuất hiện ra một cái, hay là những người đi kháng chiến nó xuất hiện ra một cái nước, một cái thế hệ mà dùng cái chuyên môn của mình để vào chiến trường để vẽ, cũng giống như các nhà quay phim, các cái nhà coi như là chụp ảnh, là đem cái lao động của mình ra để tham gia vào cuộc kháng chiến. Thế thì họa sĩ của chúng ta khác với lại các nước khác là các họa sĩ ngồi ở xa đông, thì các họa sĩ của chúng ta vì cái cuộc chiến tranh của dân tộc thì rất tự nguyện chứ không phải bỏ ép gì. Tất nhiên ai cũng có gia đình, ví dụ cái lớp cao hơn nữa là đều có gia đình, cũng có những họa sĩ đông là khi vào chiến trường là để lại vợ con ở phía Bắc, họa sĩ đi Nam cũng như thế, đúng không? Rồi sau này các một số họa sĩ phía Bắc đi vào thì đều coi như tự nguyện và đem cái đóng góp đó để tham gia vào cái cuộc kháng chiến giữ nước.
By the way, you saw that Vu Yang Hong, the woman who was one of the women artists, the one who occasionally touched herself here, she's the one who died in 2011 of old age, but it was before the opening of the exhibition. But I had visited her with Din Kuli, and hers was the drawing that was in the brain of the woman picking up the hat. And there was one drawing, so I put that in the brain also because she had just died, and it was a few months before the opening, but of old age, I mean, serenely. But she didn't see the work finished, but the others did. And so.
Yeah, let's just take a few minutes.
Yeah, let's take a few minutes before.
Check anything that anybody would like to say about seeing the work in its completion. Just as you were just around that Carolyn talked about it yesterday in the lecture, and then there was a question posed about this, how we receive this work and the sort of reference to Uncle Ho. I think we need to remember that in Vietnamese, Ho is the surname, so they're not just calling him like Uncle Jim. It's like a formal title of a certain way that you describe an older, important man. So it's like, you know, revered Uncle Smith, rather than, oh, Uncle Ho, which sounds to the English ear like a kind of familiar, but it's actually probably a much more formal way, and presumably he's not claiming to be the father of the nation.
The uncle.
But in some sense it's the uncle, and I think there are other revolutionary leaders who put themselves in that relationship for various reasons to do with the kinship structures and stuff. But that was what disturbed Eva about this, you know, how do we relate to it. But it seems to me as it plays out, it was important. The other thing also that you mentioned, in case somebody wasn't here, which was that Din himself is from a family of boat people, so not a person for who you know, fought for the National Liberation Army, the Viet
his
Cong,
family
in that sense.
was.
So it's a kind of, and it's a generational return to engage with this. But I think it's really fascinating in the light of what we've been discussing. And you were posing the question, where was the art? Is the art the film? Is it art and the art that's in the film? Is this just a documentary, or is it a work?
Is it a curatorial project by Din Kuli? Well, basically also this question of the relationship between art and the world. And when I spoke about, I think, the leap that art somehow makes this leap from art to life, which is not a leap into life, but a leap into the potentiality of joy, you know, that we spoke about sometimes. But the way that they speak about this leap of the potentiality into joy, of not wanting to paint, to draw the drama, in relation to what we were saying this morning also about the also the unspeakableness of things that have not yet occurred in a way, it could be interesting to discuss their reluctance to paint sad scenes also on the level that they say it, which is a very, not because it's unspeakable, because it hasn't been elaborated, the trauma, but because of the effect, the sad effect that it would have on the people that would be looking at the drawing. So a much more simple reason for the unspeakableness, or the non-painting of the describing all these bodies with heads off and things, and not ever painting one. What do you think? Yeah.
A few undigested thoughts. After watching it, I kind of find it interesting in terms of the image of art. How, what is it? What we've been asking before, the relationship between the visual and the voice, the performance. The performance as an artwork, basically, which for me, to be honest, in many ways was more interesting, more fascinating, seducing somehow into life, or whatever. Than the actual document. For me, had a very, very strong documentary character. The little, almost like little sketches, photographs, or so that were taken. But of course, you have time in it. You have process. You have subjectivity in the drawing of the lines and everything. So that kind of relationship I found quite fascinating. Also, the play with the artist as warrior, which reminded me of the other film, which I really would like to see if we can show it. Mm-hmm. Shooting back. So who's the artist in the other film? The one with the
Rabim Roué, Syria.
If you say the artist as a warrior and take it very literally, there's an irony there, I think. Of course, not meant so much in this piece as more like the peaceful weapon.
Well, they're saying it's very engaged.
And shoot and kill.
It's very important.
Yeah.
I think in the part that we didn't see because it skipped, there's a moment where the lamb, the little, mm-hmm. I visited him too, the one who starts out and who ends almost the film, he says that they did also very strong direct action. Like, for example, they would go into villages where there would be American soldiers at night and leave all these woodcuts and things. They'd say, go home, your mother is waiting for you. Or you better go because you're going to die if you stay. So they were actually doing also very clear military work, like distributing these pieces of paper during the war to the American soldiers, as well as the drawings going to Hanoi to...
It is just, I have to just bring up an example there. Do you know the artist Claude Cahun?
Yes.
That's what she and her Suzanne Malherbe did when in Jersey.
Oh, yes, how interesting.
That they went around and they tried to get the German soldiers to go home, and
yes.
Nobody believed that they were the ones who were doing it, because there were these two lovely dotty old ladies living together, and these were the sort of the warriors, and they kept leaving on cigarette paper all these messages, and the occupying forces kept looking for who could be trying to undo the bravery of the soldiers, etc., and they were arrested, discovered, because they had their printing machine.
Yeah.
But I think that
it's an interesting. I think another issue that I would like to discuss with you is the question of how we judge the quality of an artwork or not, because if you look at these drawings, your first impulse is, okay, these are done in the early 70s. Well, there was Robert Smithson out there. There were all these avant-garde works of land art and so on that have a higher artistic value, art historical value, because they're innovative within the story of art that we want to trace as canonical. And then, so it is a question. I mean, these are painted in a kind of post-impressionist style that would have been taught in the art schools in the 50s in Vietnam. But now when you see these drawings in the documenta, or you look at them, even in this film, you can see first the different style of each of them. When you know that, you watch it 2 or 3 times and you'll see, you can tell, oh, this one was made by Tran Hyung, and this one is made by, you know, this other person and this other person. So you see the style, which of course every human or non-human too has a certain style, you know, certain flower plant or tomato plant will have a certain style. So there's this singularity of every existence, life existence, that is in itself something that we appreciate always when we notice it. But aside from that, one could say that these, from a Gell perspective, Alfred Gell perspective, art historically, these are of an extreme importance, you know, and not for reasons of innovation according to a certain history of thinking from one artist to another, what makes an artwork important, but because of the agency, from a Gell perspective, the agency of the transformative agency of the world that they have. So that for me is a question.
You could see artworks behind them, because they had. They're obviously showing the images that they had created during the war, whilst at the same time they were sat there in their studios.
Yes,
and you weren't sure at what point the work that they'd created behind them was, whether it was contemporary with more or less contemporary with the war, or whether it was done considerably later. And I thought the references to Picasso at the beginning as well might have been significant. But it seemed that they were very much trying to respond to what it was that their subjects wanted, in a kind of morale boosting way, that they wanted something that was highly representative in the absence of photographic
yes, for the soldiers, that the portraying the soldiers before before going to battle, you mean, was something that gave courage and gave joy to their subjects in the portraits that you're referring to that. In the studios, from my experience, there were works from different periods. Like in any artist studio, you know, they'll be like, oh, this one I did in 1958, it was my first thing. Oh yeah, this is an object I picked up in a flea market, and this is a painting I did last year. So there was everything all mixed up from my experience.
I wanted just to add 2 things though. One is, of course, by virtue of my own ignorance, except as sort of little edges that I've been pushed to undo by traveling to various places in Asia, etc., which is of the calligraphic tradition. And that I don't think these are post-impressionist. I think they have all sorts of values based on certain kinds of ways in which space and calligraphy and the drawing and the line and a certain kind of way of representing the figure that has its own internal history and has its own sets of references.
Yes, as well, of course.
It will intersect, obviously, with the fact that Uncle Ho was, did know Picasso, but also politically, social realism has its other political history, which says, your impressionism and your post-impressionism is bourgeois crap. So there's another logic in terms of the 20th century, which is also written out of the official Western history, because it's seen to be not.
I didn't get you right now.
Social realism, socialist
yes,
realism.
but these are not social realist style.
Well, socialism runs across a huge number, but it involves a fundamental ideological commitment to the presence of people.
Yes. Oh,
who
yes.
are
In
not,
that
as
sense,
it were,
yes.
certain kind, but the sort of the people.
Yes.
But I just wanted to pick up on the things. But in the structure of the piece, for me, where the sort of Barthesian punctum bit was the point at which the artist in uniform, described with his perpetual smile on his face, which is always the sign of somebody is deeply, deeply traumatized, that their face betrays the opposite, the secret they can't speak about. But it seemed to me when he described, just in this very swift way, this body, so it evoked in front of your eyes, you had to imagine, in a sense, the perpetual horror of war, which is this horrorism, this destruction of the body. And I'm thinking of Adriana Cavarero here, where she talks particularly about the suicide bombers, that what is this assault when the body is exploded and that the head is gone, the face is effaced. And yet there was this extraordinary thing of finding in the pocket. So you've got something you can't even bear to think about in terms of the disaggregated body and the headless body is this image in the pocket of the very person through whom he's seeking to find who he was. For me, that just was an extraordinary sense of where this relationship between drawing, representation, portraiture, and it was all about the exchange, because they're talking about the fact they make the drawings and give them back, and then the drawings either go back to the families or they end up on the altars. So it's an extraordinary kind of space in which this. So I'm tempted in my Hannah Arendtian way through Adriana Cavarero to come back to the sense of the face as the site of singularity, the irreplaceable, irreducible singularity of this one person did exist in time. And of course, so much you have, the soldiers are the cannon fodder, and even now as people are trying to think about World War I, it's that thing of trying to, through television, come back to everyday life and the individuals, what did it mean to the individuals. But this actually was a war of national liberation, so it was framed in that extraordinary, powerful sense of, which is another part of the 20th century that I have found was erased from, as a sort of white European person growing up in this sense, decolonization, the absolute violence of the decolonizing structure. And in Isaac Julian's film of Frantz Fanon, he has Stuart Hall talking about this. People don't understand. It was a violence struggle. Yes. And I thought that was this. And this is what they were saying, that it was a violent struggle that actually doesn't go in the Fanonian way to celebrate the violence, but goes in the other way through the sort of the artist to install an archive of the singularities, one by one by one by one, that still have that connection. They haven't become anonymized representatives of the Vietnamese national liberation struggle. They are absolutely between the historical and I thought that turning away from the violence and turning towards this. But then the other thing that really struck me was the repeat of this story.
The story of the blinded
this almost
artist.
mythic story.
Yes, it is.
Which is it reveals that behind the documentary is this, and then by retelling it 3 times,
even more times,
with a kind of reparation that he wasn't actually blind at the end, and he probably is at the military museum.
Yes.
And maybe he's retired now.
Yes, yes. But it is a myth.
One of them said, no, he's gone. He is blind.
It is really a myth amongst the artists themselves. So it is their own story. I mean, they are blinded. Each one is speaking about themselves. It is their. Yeah, they tell it. They all tell. But okay. They were blinded.
I do have to stop us now, so could you hold that for the next session?
Before we go on to looking at the next film that I wanted you to see, the whole one, because it's more meaningful, which is Rabbi Meroueh, perhaps we could go back to what we just saw before lunch, and if there is any questions or comments or discussion or points that you'd like to bring up. And I was surprised that my question fell into some sort of an empty pit. The question that I had when I was looking at these works originally, traveling with Dean Cully, and then after seeing again this, the video was, on what basis do we judge the quality of an artwork? That according to certain canonical history of Western avant-garde art, these drawings made in the early 70s and late 60s would be absolutely quelconque, not interesting artistically. And so, but so how do we, what gives it, if we use the gel text in terms of what possibility of transformation of the world do they have? What is the agency to see the artwork almost as an enchanted technology? And they are hugely effective.
Can I say something on that?
Yes.
It feels like, do you want me to use the microphone?
Yes.
It feels like your question there of how we judge the artwork fits into a history of art journey that almost feels irrelevant
Yes.
in the context of the exhibition and the work that you've presented in pulling together Castle, except it's not irrelevant because it's part of it as well, but because for me you've done something really different in this the ecology aspect, I'm going to call it war art aspect, but that's not necessarily
What?
war art aspect, but that's not necessarily what it is, but just that the witness.
Mm-hmm.
There's so Afghanistan and Vietnam and putting together quite different things that for me are about an artist's identity and making sense of their place in history and the artist's place in history.
An artist's attempt to make sense of their place in history.
Yeah. And they're like a cultural group's place in history as well. So like the Vietnamese artists in Vietnam is wider than the artist.
Is what?
Wider than the individual artist who's made the work, much wider than that.
You mean Dinh Lee in respect of the individual artist that he's working with?
Yeah, yeah. It's sort of, for me, it's a both and journey.
And what about this morning's question? Because I only come with questions. I'm here to try to figure out what happened. I mean, this morning's question was, what does this have to do with that whole ecological?
But we kind of dismissed the question because it seems like so relevant to everything you're talking about. Does it not? Like in the same way that Alison was talking about your four kind of central positions. That the witnessing and seems to be so wrapped up in those ideas of kind of siege and kind of retreat and the stage. That, and then if we're just particularly as we're so talking about the artwork, like is it you just said can it be judged in the same way we're thinking about artworks? This is the central issue, isn't it?
I didn't understand. What is the central issue?
Yeah, in terms of your question about can we judge these drawings as in the same way we judge artworks within...
They are artworks, but the question is how are we judging them?
Yeah. But that's the central question running through all your kind of institutes so far, is it not?
You mean how can we judge an artwork even as an artwork since we also have the civilization of bees?
Yeah, and the beehive and the dam,
yeah.
And the dams for the beavers and all these kind of things. I mean, to me it seems like a kind of continuation more than a let's start again.
Oh, that's so interesting. So my questions around is the dam of the beaver architecture, is the beehive architecture or art, is a provocation to you to think that you can look from the perspective of the bees and see a society which is very complex, that has all the abilities of planning and projecting and analyzing a context and reacting and all the things that we would use to identify a intentional, purposeful civilization act of civilization. So I'm asking you, how can we judge those as architecture? And you're saying, so you're saying that these drawings are also, how can we judge them as art? But what about the so-called art? What gives that the authority to be art just because somebody says it's art? Or, they say it's art, like Duchampian nominalism. What Jean-Fred Gell writes in his text is also, it is absolutely unacceptable to accept the ready-made definition of art. He rejected that. He said that this idea that since the avant-garde opening up of the possibilities of what art is, We don't know what art is, so the only way we define what art is that the artist themselves claims it as art, or the framing institutions, the museums and the art critics call it art. And he has a term for this way of thinking that he criticizes, and he says that's an absurd way of solving the problem. He calls it like the institutional nomination. The institutional nomination of what art is. So where does that take me? But we should subject what the artists do too to this. But I wasn't now talking about whether it's art or not, whether it's architecture or not. I'm just wondering about how we judge the importance of things. You know, do we judge it, if we judge these drawings according to innovation in terms of formal experimentation, we would say, well, there's a personal style, but there's not particular innovation in terms of the language. But if we judge it in terms of the historical impact and transformation that occurs, then they are very, 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 I mean, the thought of these drawings hanging in the jungle on clothespins, you know, is, so if you put the whole display, if you put the space of the production and the display and the transactions that occur as part of what you're looking at, then, you know, nobody else that I've ever heard of has been hanging drawings on strings in battlefields. I mean, it's quite innovative if you take the whole thing as the art moment.
Yeah, but then you've got to have access to the whole thing as the art moment. And
Yes.
What I wanted to untangle was the relationship between, in all you've been saying today, the relationship between drawings as shown at dOCUMENTA, but also the drawings in the film that we've just seen. Because it's the film that's the mediator, isn't it?
Right now.
Right now.
And it was next to the drawing.
Yes, it's the film that's the mediator. And actually it's the film that's the mediator in dOCUMENTA as well.
No,
that
they were also the drawings.
Well,
next to
yes,
the film.
but yes, in one sense, but that raises or helps the audience to answer that question or think about that question you've put, to think about that question that you've just put, as to what is the status of these drawings in an international art show. In one sense, you know, the film helps with that, doesn't it?
It frames them.
It frames
them. And it
them.
brings in that whole part that we can't see,
Exactly.
of the drawings being done with the flashes of the...
Yeah.
And it brings in all of that.
But you
and
can't
allows us to see it as a whole.
Yeah.
To see what's around the spiral jetty.
Exactly.
To see the spiral jetty in a landscape.
Yeah. But in a sense, the question you asked about its relationship to the Gel text, I can't remember the Gel text without rereading it enough to think about them in that context, which is about the enchantment of the technological dimension, isn't it?
Well,
I'm hopeless. I have to read it all over again. It's the Trebillon Browd. Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's about looking at art and judging the quality of art in relation to its transformative powers.
Yeah. Okay.
So not, you know, what can it do? What does it do? How does it make changes?
Yes.
It's like an anthropological look at
Okay.
what art would be.
Okay.
How does he call it? The actancy of the agency of the artwork. What is the agency of it?
Yeah, I'll have to go back and read it now.
Agency?
Yeah.
It's aesthetic virtuosity. It's the...
Yeah, you have to learn to do it. That was the technology bit in it.
Aesthetic virtuosity
that gives it
how
that.
it was actually crafted and
Yeah,
made.
which is the technological bit of it. I'm going to hang on to this because it's really important.
No, but the virtual. He's saying basically it's almost like against the idea of conceptual art, that art is just in mind.
Yeah.
The aesthetic virtuosity is part of the reason why that object has a kind of magic ability to transform the world.
Yeah.
So there is something extremely virtuosic in painting the portrait of a person who's about to get blown up into bits in the middle of the jungle. I mean, I remember in talking with these artists that they would say that they didn't have paint. They used like different earths and things, the pigments that they would get in the jungle. One of them, Lam, the little short one, he said to me, and the Americans, they had all their technical equipment. If they didn't have película, how do you say, film stock, or a machine broke, you know, they couldn't do it. We would just use anything, you know. We made our own paints as well. So this virtuosity is also in their work, I think.
But shouldn't we be applying those kind of questions about the actual film?
As well,
yes.
Yes,
let's do that.
I mean, that's what I want to do too.
Because I can't get past the kind of the cheesiness
Let's do
of
that.
some of the animation and
Yes.
and the musical score, and all these things are kind of like barriers in terms of getting to those interesting things you're talking about the drawings.
Yes. Let's.
Technology, I knew that the technology was in there somewhere.
No, but I'm interested that you say was cheesiness, because it seemed to be that you had to enter to some extent into the effect of illustration and drawing. At the same time, but yes, but if you didn't do something like that, if you didn't evoke another tradition, obviously, which is animation, you know, and a whole set of different kinds of animations and animation cultures, which are very much based on unbelievable drawing skills, representational skills. I mean, this new film, who's this? He's going to be the last film, something of fire. That's just this big new animated film, which is the last of the great.
Oh yeah, Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, you know, and I mean, we
That's
at this point in
interesting
time, we
relation to
cannot be
the
raising
animation.
what happened in New York in the 1960s as the only standard by which anybody anywhere in the world can be judged. That's my passionate feeling at this point, because we simply are not carrying enough in our heads other different, you know, visual cultural traditions, reference points, calligraphic, you know, I mean, people are trained in Oriental as opposed to Western art, and all of that capacity to make, you know, little touches of color, little touches of marks, you know, the economy of the hand that enables certain kinds of drawing to happen. And in that question of animation, I don't find it cheesy, I find it interrupting the dominance of the sort of specular optical, you know, photographic gaze to say, now I'm doing a documentary, this gives you the truth. And I'm making a film about art. And if you do that,
it's interrupting the
becomes
documentary.
an illustrated image within it. But something is being interrupted in a way that is difficult for Eurocentric folk who are trained in certain ways to digest straight off, but you have to do the work to see what they're doing.
Why?
So I would protest cheesiness myself. I'd say there's a you know, a technical virtuosity there in terms of making sure you keep remembering.
It's a story that is being
somebody
told.
is making this.
Yes, and that Dinh is storytelling.
He's doing that. And these figures are part of they're not just become the performative objects of a documentary, which is the danger. They have to keep interrupting it.
But the music, for instance, is the only English name on the credits.
Was the guy who did the music.
And the music is like, you know, for me, like one of the worst kinds of like parody or of a kind of Asian kind of plinky plonky MIDI music. But like, if what you're saying is true, then why not? You know, this incredible Vietnamese music, I imagine, is appropriate of the era or contemporary practices.
No, but Dinh is not a naive person. He's super, you know, not naive. So I think there is not a cheesiness, but there is an element to this piece that is questioning the belief systems of the people who are in it and being interviewed, and questioning the belief systems of us, you know, that would project onto this idealized view of the Viet Cong. I mean, there is this element of not cheesiness, but what did you say? Clinkiness? The music. I mean, kinkiness. Yeah, I think.
Absolutely, good, a specialist.
Yes, specialist, but you need a specialist knowledge.
I mean, there is an element, as all somehow good artworks, it's not clear what Dinh is doing or what the message is. It's just as much breaking the frames of recognizability and making that broader, change our way of seeing what was going on there through these singular faces of these people, as much as it is also working on these projections of idealization of the Viet Cong. I think that's an element of it, that see through the technique.
Yeah, and there is a sort of narrative going on with his technique, though, because in a sense the drawings are animated, and the only form of representation that isn't in there is the photograph. There's the moving photograph, which is the film. Is photography, the only element of representation in there. So there's drawing, there's animation, there's the film that is filming the drawing and the animation, but there's no photograph.
What does that mean? There's no
It
photograph?
means it's
the movie is photograph.
No, it isn't. It's not a still photograph.
No,
it's
but
not the
it's
still photograph of documentary.
You mean still photograph?
Yeah.
Oh, the documentary when they
documentary
do that trope
photograph.
of saying tack, tack,
Exactly.
tack. Yes,
And
that's true.
In one sense, I think the story of the guy who is blinded as soon as he picks up the film camera.
That's a video camera.
Video camera, okay.
Yeah, by the
Sorry,
way,
when he
he's
picks up the video camera, seems to me there
it's not a video camera, excuse me, it was a Super 8.
Super 8 camera.
It was
okay,
a Super 8
'cause
film
you can't see him,
camera.
Yeah. You know, the moment he picks up sort of technology, in a sense, he's killed by technology, but not by the tank, by the very piece of technology he's using.
No, he's killed by being shot for picking up the technology.
Yeah. Well, okay. But it results in his picking up the technology results in his death. Which is kind of interesting when you go back to the hand drawing.
Not his death, but his blindness.
His blindness, sorry, which is even more significant.
Yes,
isn't
but
it?
that's also part of the saying that the American representation is only through photography and that it's blind.
Yeah.
It's not like the drawings.
No, it's not like the drawings.
So,
absolutely
and
not
at
like
the
the
end,
drawings.
when he says there were no images of the South Vietnamese Republican embedded artists, because they all had from the
I don't know, it's just kind of an observation. It seems that there are many layers of storytelling, aren't there?
Yes.
In there.
I was just thinking, even that story of the guy who was blinded picking up the camera, the way it's drawn and the way it's repeated could actually be a complete apocryphal story.
Of course. Potful. These are many words I'm learning.
Apocryphal.
Kinky. Oh, apocryphal. That's a real one. I thought potful. You know, like it's full of
Could
pot.
be a potful story.
Apocryphal. Yes.
And how he uses that drawing technique, of the different types of drawing technique, to sort of overlay and interplay the what is the fiction, what is the imagined, what is the actual. What is
it's interesting that the man picking up the film camera, that part of the animation is not done in the style of any of the drawings.
No.
That's the only one that's done in the style of typical digital age animation that simulates and emulates early cell animation. That gives the style of like hand done cell animation.
It's a computer effect, like a filter.
Yeah, it's a computer effect.
That's what struck me against the drawings, which had a kind of a different quality about them.
So this brings in the question of lies. Okay, that brings us to lies. You know, yesterday I put in the longest title in the world of the lecture, the word lies. So what does this have to do with lies? I mean, why lie? Why lie?
Did you say lies?
Yes, L-I-E-S. Yeah.
Why lie?
Can you read your whole title again?
Oh, that's a hard one. Can I read the whole title again?
The title is On Witnessing,
Here it is.
Withdrawing, Retreating and Participating, Gifts, Debts. I actually have contradictions. and
Gift,
questions.
debts and lies.
You did change it.
I changed it maybe. What's the...
Trauma and healing.
Lies, trauma and healing. I actually...
Maybe
At
that's
some
not...
point you gave me a different one. Witnessing, withdrawing, retreating, gifts, debts, contradictions and questions of sincerity and contemporary art.
Oh yeah, that was the previous. This is later.
Right.
Yes.
Lost the witnessing and came witnessing.
Well, because I thought I'd speak about it, but it didn't have to be in the title. Anyway, which brings us to... Sorry.
Should we move on
Yes,
to...
we can... Yes. two things. Let me ask you, what do you think? We can do two things. Three. We can read the interview with Din Lee just to get to the bottom of at least one thing, if we want to, or you can read it on your own. We can read Bracha Ettinger's Communicating, Reflection around Hiroshima Mon Amour, to do some reading, or we can move to Rabbi Mroué's piece and watch it from beginning to end. What do you prefer?
I'm going to put to the vote watching the Rabbi Mroué because it would continue the visit, and then tomorrow morning we could do some reading. I think it would be too complicated to go into a very theoretical text at this moment, but we've just begun to get a dialogue going.
Okay.
I was just wondering where you were going with the lies.
The lies.
There's lots of things about truth and lies in the readings. Actually.
Well, you know, a witness is supposed to be, when a witness is someone who has been in front of certain events in the body and who can bear testimony of it in a judicial trial, only if not involved, like neither the brother or the sister, or somehow not emotionally involved, because that would avoid the lie. Although having witnessed the actual event, if you are involved in it, you are not a terstis, a third party, so you could be prone to lying. So the question of who is lying, the third party who is not involved emotionally, or is Primo Levi lying, is a question, would be the question. Is that a lie? You know, why would Primo Levi not be in a court of justice? I mean, the division that Agamben gives, well, he reminds us of, because it's a traditional legal one, is that you can only be in the court of justice if surely you are not lying, so you have no interests in the case. So you have an unaware witness. You just by chance were there when somebody was being killed. And that question is a big one because Amar Kambar, for example, suggests in his piece in the dOCUMENTA that that might not be necessarily right, that actually the personal engagement in the situation may have more. He says, why cannot poetry be in a court of justice as evidence? Amar Kanbar, in his work, you know, about the seeds. So the storyteller, is the storyteller a liar, you know, and what is the purpose?
And just for clarification, I think we need to think about words or, you know, language first. Yes. Because what's the difference between fabrication, falsification, faking it, lying? I think there are subtle differences, and I don't have any spontaneous answers to that. But there is certainly an intentionality to lying. There's some consciousness, some knowledge where you know.
Well, I think
with
it's
other things too. I mean, I really haven't thought about it. You know, I would have to look it up, maybe etymologically. You know, where do
yes,
but
I think that's very important because if you go to a dictionary and you look at lie, not only is it intentional and not adherence to so-called facts, but it also is it carries with it an objective gain that you who lie will gain. So you lie for a purpose in order to achieve certain things, like you don't get punished by your mother, or you can get the money, you don't get... So there's the voice that lies would have not only fabrication or falsification, but convincing of something which is not adherent to the actual facts for a purpose which benefits the voice that lies. That would be the difference between simply falsification or fabrication of a false reality. So the storyteller would not necessarily lie because there is no objective benefit to the voice of the storyteller in putting out those lies. But the storyteller might fabricate or falsify in order to tell a story end too? Let me ask you.
There might be.
I'm not sure. It may have to do with the
They might sell their story.
They might sell the novel as it's true.
Or gain credibility, which would be false credibility, but something, I don't know.
Yeah, well, in that case, it would be judged as a lie. I mean, then it would just go into the category of lie. It's like an ethical judgment on when you use the word lie as opposed to falsify or fabricate. What do you think? Because you asked the question.
I was thinking that perhaps you could think of it in terms of, I was thinking about this in the Susan Vogel exhibition, and that because Jill talks about the decontextualization of the work of art, because for the people who made the work of art, it wasn't supposed to be in a kind of white space gallery. It's when it's had a completely different function purpose altogether, and that maybe if you were looking at the works of the Vietnamese artists, in what you're saying is giving it values from looking at them as a kind of 1950s, from a European perspective, kind of 1950s representative art in a white cube space. That's its power and its validity is actually within its being hung on the line, within the power that the people gave to it, who were the subjects of what was being drawn. That's where its
That's very interesting.
Was.
In this case, Dinh Q. Lee resolved it by not exhibiting any drawings by anyone who is dead. So he asked the question, is it okay to hang it in a white cube space? Which is the way of resolving this problem, because the Western canon puts in the art museum objects that were not made for being in an art museum as a way of destroying them in terms of their agency, because they must become purposeless as a Western art sculpture in order to be in the Metropolitan. So you lose the original use of the object, you transform it into a purpose, you distance it in time, and then you can put it in the art museum. So that's what he resolved it by asking. and actually, that those artists were actually making works that were fine for white cube too, because they were trained in Hanoi, most of them in academy, and it's true that there are traditions of calligraphy and traditions of even, landscape painting in China and Japan, for God knows how long, that are also in the background of the work. But it is true that at that time, there were these colonial schools, so they did have this French professors even coming to teach watercolor and so on. And so they also, I think, there was a show in Hanoi that Ho Chi Minh organized of these drawings. It was white cube, I saw the museum where it was in. So they were also accepted to be hung on walls at the time, in the 70s, of which there's a catalog.
It all started with this sentence. The Syrian protesters are recording their own deaths. This sentence really struck me. I thought, how could the Syrians be documenting their own deaths when they are struggling for a better future? When they are revolting against death itself, both moral and physical death? When they are fighting for life itself? Are they really shooting their own deaths? The idea intrigued me. This is how I found myself on the internet, navigating from one side to another, searching for facts, evidence that could tell me more about death in Syria today. I wanted to see and I wanted to know more. Although we all know that this world, the world of the internet, is constantly changing and evolving. It's an impure and corrupt world, full of rumors and unspoken words. Nevertheless, it's still a world of temptation and seduction, of lust and deceit and of betrayal. In this world, I found a lot of material. But what struck me was a very special video. I gave it this title, Double Shooting. This video was the catalyst of this presentation. Double shooting. One person is shooting with a camera and the other is shooting with a rifle. One shoots for his life and the life of his citizens, and the other shoots for his life and the life of his regime. How can we read this video? The duration of the video is 1 minute and 23 seconds. The shot is taken from one of the upper floors of the building in a residential neighborhood. It's clear that the Syrian cameraman is filming from the window or balcony of an apartment. He is standing inside the apartment, holding his mobile phone in his hand and filming what's happening outside. The film starts with the sound of a gun being shot, followed by a series of images of rooftops, balconies, walls, windows, and different buildings. The unseen cameraman makes a fast-paced introduction.
الأمن يضرب على الإخوة المواطنين في حي طريق الشام كرم الشام 1/7/2011 بدون أي سبب، لا تظاهر ولا أي شيء.
Suddenly, the eye spots a sniper hiding in the street, lurking behind the wall of a building in the right-hand corner. The eye loses the sniper. It tries to spot him again. It hovers left and right, up and down, nothing, nothing, nothing. And then there he is, in the street, still there, standing and holding his rifle. The image is shaking, as if the viewer's eye cannot believe what it's seeing. Suddenly, the sniper sees the eye watching him. An instant, the eyes of the two men meet. Eye contact. Then, without the slightest hesitation, the sniper lifts his gun and aims at the eye. He shoots and hits his target. The eye falls to the ground, turned upwards towards the ceiling of the room. The voice of the cameraman who was hit is heard saying, I am wounded, I am wounded, I am wounded. Then nothing. Complete silence. The image stops. Is he dead? We don't know.
I find myself, we actually watched the whole thing through, and it was installed in a situation where there were all sorts of other things in the room prior to it. And then there was a sort of, a corpse. There was a sort of installation which sort of brought back the invisible body.
What proportion of the film have you seen?
What?
4/5.
I find it much, much more powerful watching it in this context here than I did in the installation in the train station. And I think maybe because it became more like a lecture or kind of a...
Here it's more like a lecture.
Yeah.
Yes.
And him showing a PowerPoint and the kind of...
His.
Yeah, and the kind of graphics and text and all this kind of stuff, it becomes more like the kind of apparatus of like a PowerPoint display or something like this, rather than like fine art video.
Yeah, I thought that. I mean, it's like he's reading an essay, isn't it?
It reminded me of Mark Lecky or something.
He's presenting the news
type way of... we've seen two artists that have been presenting their work in that way, that they're addressing their audience directly like they're a newsreader. Is this like a new way of... Is this a new thing?
But he was also an actor, isn't he?
Performance artist.
Performance artist, but he was in this, Maxim was saying, this film with Catherine Deneuve.
Oh yes, but that's because his friends asked him to be the actor in it. It's a film made by the couple in Lebanon, Hamid Jihadis, and they are artists and they also make experimental films, and they invited Catherine Deneuve to be the protagonist who's going to Lebanon to find an ex-husband or something, and there's a taxi driver that drives her through the landscape, and it's Rabim Roué. But it's as if a group of, he's not an actor, I mean, it's a group of artists doing this artwork with Catherine Deneuve, sort of. But not his idea, he was just performing in it for them. The two other artists who are actually also experimental filmmakers.
What I find so striking about intense, it is the format of the lecture. It is the format of analysis an analysis of those things which need to be taken out of the context in which they are occurring in order to make us pay attention to them. So, in instance, art, going back to your a priori, what is art? It's the space of a kind of reflection of something that's taken from somewhere else to be given to that. And what he was saying about this, the space of seduction, the internet, what is going on there, but then the analysis that he subjects it to, which arrives at the point at which people holding a phone up, because it's a screen technology, do not have the same thing as if you were looking through, you know, the lens finder of a photograph, where you do put the camera to your eye and you can't see. You know, if you take photographs, you take the camera down, you put the camera through, because you're bound to locate your eye going through the viewfinder. Whereas here, the man is watching something which is on the other side of his camera, of his phone. It's almost as if we have these objects which can take photographs, but we haven't worked out that they are taking photographs, and therefore there's this body behind the camera. So I thought that point where he thinks he's watching something on the screen opens up an entirely different understanding of screen culture's power to disembody us to the point at which the fragility of the human body stands exposed to the gun.
Yes.
But the person who is standing exposed to the gun does not imagine that by virtue, not because he's in some kind of fantastical world, but because he's watching the translation into a screen image already. And that's, I think, so I was thinking about Hui, whose work is about the question of the digital camera as a kind of prosthesis. All the way through, he's setting up the notion of a prosthetic, but actually it's the failure of it to be prosthetic that produces the risk of death. And I think that's I found that quite shocking and astonishing, because one's trying to get round what is the affect as well as the effect of, you know, these endless screens, these endless machines that we are now processing. So everybody holding up their cameras, filming every kind of event, they're already watching it as a screen image, not a.
But he's still suggesting
that within that they had time to move away from that dangerous situation.
Yes, and they didn't.
If they noticed what we're doing.
Yeah,
but they don't.
I think that the initial shooting that they showed, you could see that the person was like almost looking with their camera there was a sense of disorientation there. But there's another one which he set up by saying, I think he'd set up by saying that there was an awareness that you would think that people had, but they almost chose to stay within that situation, where the camera is very much moving laterally and it's not trying to find it. The person is stationed there and must know that they're vulnerable. And I just the thing
the object makes you unaware that you're vulnerable.
Yes, he says that you feel you're inside the film.
You're disputing that. Okay, so Paris is good. Okay, go on.
Oh,
I was just going to go on to say that I thought it was significant that he was from Lebanon, and in my head I was kind of linking it up with the fact that if you're thinking of it as being like that you are deliberately standing there and you're choosing to make a decision to record this because you're representing your people and you're making a stand as a protest as such. I was just thinking about the experience I've just had in Nigeria, where people are standing for office even though they know that, like somebody I was staying with had to flee with her children to a different part of the country because her husband's standing for office. But people are still standing up and being counted, as it were, even knowing what the danger was. And I was thinking the way he seemed to be talking was a little bit like the fact that he'd kind of said he's from Lebanon as well. There's that perhaps it's coming from like a different perspective of one that isn't easy to understand here, because you're never placed in a situation where you have to be putting your life on the line to be standing up for what you believe is right. And I just thought that the fact that he mentioned he's from Lebanon and the way he was talking about things, I just saw in a different way, perhaps.
I think it's worthwhile to actually read the project proposal that we had. I found it because it might clarify some of these points. What Griselda was saying was repeating what he was saying, that you are contesting, is that the person holding the camera does not go away from the gunfire because there is a hubris, an idea that he or she is immortal, because it is the thought that we are inside the image already. In this Facebook generation, we're already inside the image, so we're not going to die. So you can do these things which are ridiculous in a way in terms of your own well-being. And I think that the end of the video that we didn't see with the question of the tank, indeed it ends with a bit of a failure of the Syrian revolution. And if we do look at what's going on in Egypt now and what's going on in Syria, you do you might agree with his interpretation of the historical moment, because he ends the film by saying it's not true that you have the guns on one side and the cameras on the other and you can change the world with the cameras. It's not true. That's a fiction that is being sold to us by the camera companies. You actually don't change the political system, and he anticipates a civil war in this end. The last sentence is a rather tragic one, which says it's not enough. You know, the cell phones are not enough if this is going to turn into a civil war. What happened in Syria after is quite interesting, because not interesting, but tragic. But that's exactly what happened. You know, that suddenly the gases were out, and there's a civil war going on right now. So let's read this. So I think that let's say the intention of the lecture, it ends with that note that it's not true that you can oppose the cell phones to the guns and win. So should I read it, or does anyone else want? Well, I can read it. Okay. So in November 2011, he writes, of the various parts of the project, the pixelated revolution as a performance, and then the installation where it will be shown in the exhibition, and then there's some details here. Okay, so a lecture performance about the usage of mobile phones during the Syrian revolution. This lecture aims to study the advices and directions regarding the taking of photographs during the events of the Syrian revolution, as these advices were shared via the medium of Facebook and other virtual communication tools. So there were guides going around. What is the relationship of this act of photographic documentation when seen through the prism of Dogma 95, the cinematographic manifesto of Danish filmmakers Lars von Trier and Thomas Winterberg? Do you remember the Dogma 95? Okay, and so it's basically very rigid indications of kind of realism in a way. In which manner can we envisage the photographic traces broadcast by the Syrians in the vast universe of the internet? A universe that is loose and ever-changing, that regenerates itself constantly, that is subject to viruses and other phenomena of deterioration, a universe that is framed by incomplete downloads, pixelated images, and ruptured modes of communication. Are the broken up and incomplete images sent by the Syrians an extension of their physical experience? Is the mobile phone an extension of their brains, of their body, of their being? In this lecture performance, my aim is to investigate and read into these matters and present my personal interpretation of this phenomenon. Pixelated Revolution is a non-academic lecture about the use of cell phone imagery by Syrian protesters. This is third person. This is not him, it's me. Mroué noted that because Syria lacks journalists per se, Online cell phone videos are about the only option, aside from state-run media, we have for learning what's going on there, especially during these recent months of anti-government protests. He smartly reduced the key differences between official and unofficial documentation to a single attribute. Official video comes from cameras mounted on tripods, which calmly scan crowds and give the impression that all is under control. This is part of what you didn't see in the video. You see images of official TV reporting of the demonstrations, and it's the crowds are moving, but the camera is still. By contrast, the cell phone videos are fragmentary and jumpy, an analog for an unavoidable artifact of the fact that street protesters are besieged by armed soldiers. Syrian protesters, that is, actually can't shoot with tripods. Unlike Egyptian activists whose protests have centered on Tahrir Square and who shoot their own video with tripods, the Syrians are constantly on the run. And the video, well, Mroué showed was harrowing. Okay. The talk's centerpiece was a video he had dubbed double shooting. Actually, I didn't write this. I never used the word harrowing. We don't know. Someone wrote it. The 83-second clip, maybe it's a review, shot from a balcony, concludes shortly after the cameraman spots an army sniper standing on a nearby balcony. Gunshots are heard and the screen goes dark though the fate of the cameraman is unknown. Why didn't the cameraman run? Mroué speculates that he was lulled by the false security that many camera people feel. That's what Griselda is talking about. The sense that they do not subsist in the same reality as does whatever danger they're documenting. Mroué's talk proceeded on his explicit assumption that the phone camera eye equals the cameraman's eye equals the cameraman himself, that it's an optical prosthetic, so that when we watch the video, we're experiencing exactly what he did. But Mroué believes that though such footage is necessary and valuable, images alone are not enough to achieve any victory, especially when the other side has all the guns. In the question and answer session following Pixelated Revolution, Mroué added that he believes that the proper role of the contemporary artist is not to make more images, of which there are already plenty. Rather, he said, for me, it's more important and more useful to make images that are already imposing themselves on our daily lives and are keeping us from thinking, and use them as materials to make us think. Okay, the rest is perhaps not necessary. So not to make more images, but to use existing images as materials to make us think. And exposing the fallacy of the cell phone revolutions.
I wanted to add something in terms of voice and sound.
Yes.
Because I find these few seconds, it had a big impact on me, but also in terms of the sound. It starts with sound and it ends with sound. It's this, the human voice. I'm wounded, I'm wounded. And I find that, again, another little element within the overall piece that, I don't know, shows some, fragility, vulnerability, the kind of the human element in this war of images, or the failure of the, optical prosthesis, but comes in through a different medium, which, I find interesting.
I'm very fascinated to put the two films and the two discussions together.
Yes, let's do that.
Because in a way you had, in the case of the Vietnamese fighting in there, again what Pam has said, the sort of a national liberation struggle, you have to be there, you have to put yourself on the line. They say they have to go to the war zones, but in a sense they have to produce images because there are no other ways to register that presence on Earth of people who are engaged in this. And then, this is the 60s and the 70s. that particular moment, and in a whole, not only the difficulty of the not having the cameras and having the cameras, but having their hands and their drawings, and then in this situation, the effect of the screen. You were nodding.
It was just that in fact, they both got shot in the eye, as it were.
Yes.
In both, it was just striking, wasn't it? That both the soldier in the Viet Cong film and, different kinds of actors in the situation.
The absent soldier, the non-interviewed Viet Cong artist, the myth.
Yeah, the mythic, yeah.
The mythic, yeah.
Yeah, but that for me just held those two pieces together.
Yes.
Was the mediation of the camera, or as a consequence of the mediation of the camera, one was blinded and we don't know quite what happened to the other one. In the Rab Mouet film, do we? He said, I'm wounded, I'm wounded.
We
don't
imagine,
know.
Yeah. Okay. He wants us to imagine maybe he got wounded or dead.
Yeah. It's just an observation.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I think someone could write a nice essay taking these two pieces.
Well, I was doing that as you were.
Oh yeah, please do that. I think it would be very interesting. Yeah. You see, one of the other things of doing something like dOCUMENTA is that there's thousands and thousands of things that one could analyze and write about and think about. And then in this rush, to the next Biennale and the next, it's not done. There were 3,000 journalists, 6,000 articles about dOCUMENTA, not one that wrote, that could bring these two together up to now. It's really astonishing in a way, because Griselda, you just brought this up, but it's true. It's the two different historical periods, but plus Dinh Cu Ly on the 60s and 70s, the camera. So the presence of Rabi is also so the presence of Dinh Cu Ly and the presence of Rabi. Rabi is very present in this one. He's telling the story as if it were fact. He's giving the lecture. And the presence of Dinh Cu Ly is only in one moment. I don't know if you noticed it, but there's one moment when one of the Viet Cong artists say, I haven't pulled these out, when he shows the two men naked washing. Says, I haven't looked at these in years, they're away, and I would never exhibit such a thing, ha 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 ha. It's you, Dinh, who take them out. So, this embarrassment about the pleasure of looking at the body washing in the river. That moment of pleasure evokes Dinh Cu Ly into the piece, which he could have edited out, but he didn't.
That's really interesting.
So that also is so there are 2 or 3 levels that we can look at in comparison. 2 pieces made at the same time, 2011 and 2011.
The other thing it linked with was what you've said about Walid Rudd and the specific political cultural space of Lebanon, which I know very, very little about, but Isabelle Delacour, who's finished a PhD here last year, did this beautiful project called A Tale of Two Cities, which was studying Sarajevo and Beirut and how artists managed in situations where the whole infrastructure is destroyed by civil war or the sort of siege of Sarajevo. How do you make an art world? How do you make art? How do you deal with it? And so it was very interesting because obviously there's so little to sustain. It's not like here it's all given. You have an art school and you have exhibitions and you have galleries and you can convey against them, but actually there was not even so it was interesting, and seems so much of the question is of what is remembered, what isn't remembered about the Lebanese civil war, what people ever say or don't say, and actually the struggle of the artists to make. So there's a lovely artist called Paula Yacoub, who is was an architect, became a photographer, who just photographs sort of spaces and places particularly that do and don't say things, right? And so it's linking up on your question of Daniel Roas and Hella, the question of secrets, the secrets that come out anyway. So that's a different kind of aspect. But I was thinking of Ollie Rudd's notion of how you could tell the histories of anything between fabulation, fabrication, that it's not just a simple matter of truth. And I wondered there if that Rabbi Mrouet's whole playing with, this thing about playing with the lecture.
Yes.
I mean, I did a lecture once on Vera Frankel, who made a piece about a missing Canadian woman artist. I mean, she invented her, and used the models, which kind of parodied various forms of speaking, the interview, the lecture, the different types. And it seems to me quite important about the ways of talking and using the intimacy of this camera to make any of us who went into that space to feel that we were thinking along with him. He has his piece of paper there. It was, there was a lecture, and yet at the same time, you're not experiencing it as a lecture because you're not placed in the position of the student.
Right.
So it's going back to the witnessing. You're solicited to share with him the process of his thinking about this as he witnesses both these unwitnessed deaths, and yet these deaths that are recorded, which then become part of the internet. And I do think that notion, not so much what is the artwork, your art program, but what we've been struggling with and what your lecture has provoked is different kind of positioning of the artist, but what the artist is doing when the artist takes on the initiative to be doing, not just making something, but setting a certain kind of place of doing, investigating, researching, bringing forth, putting in place with...
what is the artwork doing also? I mean, I think that's exactly right. That's, again, brings me back to Gel. Why reading Gel was important. It's a kind of the agency of the artwork that is transformative in the world. What does it do? What is it set up as a technology to do?
I was interested that at the start, a bit of a language thing, he said, he called it this presentation.
Yes.
He didn't call it this artwork. You just referred to it as this artwork. And sort of when did it become an artwork, or is it become an artwork in his mind, but he's naming it a presentation?
Yes. It was clearly an artwork. He has been doing lecture performances as a form.
Okay.
Like one could say painting or sculpture.
Okay.
It's a form particularly strong in Lebanon, where Walid Rad is from as well. Rabbi Mrouet has actually been doing lecture performances since as long as Walid Rad, although Walid Rad has emerged as the kind of beginning of this type of artwork, the fictionalized lecture. But it's considered by them an artwork.
And then the other thought I had as well was at the start, him referring to the lies that are perpetuating on the internet and the place of lie, given our earlier discussion.
What does he say about that? I don't remember.
I can't remember exactly what he says, but I thought he said it was something to do with the lies that are shared on the internet. Does anyone else remember
that there's
it?
so much going on that is not. Yes. Well, that's the big question with internet, isn't it? What is so-called truthful and what isn't? And also because there's so much truthful or factual information that it depends on what you decide to use as facts to construct your argument. I mean, the fact that something is factual is no longer of any importance almost in journalism, because you can argue one thing or argue another according to which facts you decide to take, because there's so many facts compared to the past that you could take. I remember speaking with a journalist about this. He was saying that that's not the point. The point is somehow this, I guess, the sincerity of the voice and the element before the taking of the facts. what facts you are collecting. Does that relate to what you're saying?
It just struck a chord because prior to us watching the video, we'd had that discussion around you including the word lies in the title.
Yeah.
And so I suppose I was just sort of thinking.
But I do believe that there are lies. I mean, I have a priorized too. You know, the lies that are told for the purpose of erasure of people and environmental issues. I mean, to lie about, for example, global warming, or to lie about the massacre of a whole group of people. I mean, there are lies that are told for the purpose of power that we know, and of control over the world for profit. And so I am not saying that all lies are the best thing in the world. I mean, nor am I a relativist saying there is no truth. I mean, I think it's the purpose to which something is put. What is the use value or something? But this is banal. I mean, I'm saying banal things at 4 o'clock. Banal. Banal. Let's go to something less banal.
A short break.
How about I not read it and someone else reads it? Wouldn't that work? Take some turns. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about this, well, one of the many interesting things about this notebook is that it is the only notebook that is not reproduced in the Book of Books. So the Book of Books collects the 100 notebooks, plus an extra one, number 101, that is the Kabul notebook. So there are actually 101 notebooks, but in the Book of Books that reproduces all the notebooks, the only one that's not reproduced is this one, because Daniel was the only author who asked that it not be collected in the book. So again, it's a kind of withdrawal and retreat, and existence only in the 2,000 copies that were made of this small, separate notebook, for reasons that are very coherent with what he writes about holding one's tongue and so on. And Daniel teaches, he's most notably the translator into English of Agamben, of almost all of Agamben's books, and a friend of his, younger, he was a student, much younger. And he's also noted for his book on ecolalias, which is on the forgetting of language, that was about 10 years ago, one of his first publications. And then he wrote a book called The Inner Touch, which is about a kind of philosophy of sensation. What is sensation? What is that? As opposed to, it's kind of an archaeology of sensation. In fact, that's the subtitle, The Inner Touch. And then he wrote a book about piracy, pirates, which came out after this. That book about piracy, everyone thought would speak about internet pirates, but it was only a history of actual physical pirates in history, up to the Somali pirates today. So it has something to do with this, also with the fact that it comes out during the period of all this, speaking about internet piracy, and that it doesn't touch it is a very interesting, I think, point that is typical of his way of working and thinking. And then he's written also about the imaginal field. I can't remember the essay title, but it was taking from Henry Corbin, Islamic studies of the imaginal faculty, and taking from Simondon and from Aristotle. He was exploring the status of the image as something which has a materiality to it, which is neither in the mind nor in the thing. Like an image reflected off a mirror is there, even though there's no one looking at it. So it's in this spectral, in between zone. So that's a little bit of Daniel background. Okay, so who is?
We can go around. I'm going to start. Right. Okay, Daniel Heller-Roizen, Secrets of Al-Yahiz. No, really, it must be a Yahiz. Among the lesser works of the 9th century Iraqi writer, does anybody know how that name should be pronounced in Arabic? I think the dot will make it a ch sound. Okay, we don't want it. Okay, among the lesser works of the 9th century Iraqi writer Yahiz is an essay entitled The Guarding of the Secret and the Holding of the Tongue. It teaches 2 skills seldom named in the enumeration of the arts of language: how not to speak at the wrong time, and how not to lose a secret by divulging it. Al-Jahiz wastes no time recalling that all secrets can be disclosed, and that it is a good in itself for those who hold them that they remain concealed. He begins instead by commenting on the causes that may lead to unwanted revelations. It would be an error to ascribe these solely to the many infirmities of the will. Admittedly, quote, there is nothing more difficult than fighting with cunning against one's instinct and seeking to vanquish one's passions, end quote. And at all times, the intellect must strive to dominate the organ of its expression, the tongue, as if it were a camel to be shackled. The human breast by nature feels the weight of its many contents. It relieves itself when it finds an occasion to rid itself of all that it has stored, not only in solitude, as when one speaks to oneself, but also in company, as when one relates to a secret, to quote someone who is incapable of keeping or maintaining it. At such time...
This reminds me of what you were speaking about this morning, of the possibility to tell the story. There must be some other, that is one is... but in this case it would be almost a desire for an opposite condition. To hold. So not the holding of the person who will speak, not to be held, but the holding of oneself.
Exactly. So at such times, the tongue, Al-Jahiz notes, takes pleasure in releasing what the mind has long kept to itself. Yet, unwanted disclosures may also result from inclinations of the nobler sort. Quote, know with certainty, Al-Jahiz writes, that for all eternity it is easier to remain silent, no matter the difficulty it may cause, than to speak of something, defining an idea, and ascertaining the truth, end quote. It is a virtue to inquire and to record, and wherever silence on a subject must be imposed, a kind of sadness will ensue. Eminent guardians of secrets always felt the force of these necessities, and for this reason they devised ingenious means to express themselves while avoiding the perils of being understood. Al-Jahiz recalls the case of an illustrious jurist who guarded hidden doctrines. Quote, he knew of traditions that must remain secret and that were forbidden to the people. Since they had begun to weigh on him, he went out into the countryside, dug a hole, over which he set a goatskin, and leaned on the goatskin, telling it everything he had learned. Thus he freed his spirit, having the impression of having decanted his secret. There is also the case of Al-Amash, an early source of hadith, the pillar of Islamic doctrine that consists of the sayings, acts, and views attributed to the Prophet. Al-Amash's character was not without blemish. He was known to be irascible. Yet he possessed the knowledge necessary to guard a secret and hold his tongue. Quote, people interested in hadith used to irritate him, enjoining him to reveal to them what he wished to conceal and to repeat what he had already told them, to the point where he would swear not to teach them any more hadith for a month or more or less. But then, when he did as he said, his chest would become full to bursting and the teachings he held would strive to escape from him. Hence his solution. He would go to a ewe he had and relate to her all sorts of hadith, both those relating to general knowledge and those relating to a legal science, fiqh. And then others would say, oh, if only I were Al-Amash's ewe. Al-Yahid's presents these Islamic figures as both examples and exceptions. She suggests that as a rule, when the tongue grows restless and a secret begs its bearer to be shared, neither goatskin nor hue can so easily be found. And in his time, few he holds are familiar with the skills he imparts. Of all those who claim to be part of the elite, he comments on his Abbasid age, of those who count themselves noblemen, seek power and aim to achieve authority, take enjoyment in letters or pretend to cultivate a serious, grave and solemn attitude, all of those, despite the great number of people who live in my age, there is not one who controls his tongue in a way that satisfies me, and whom I might praise for his ability to guard a secret. On this point, Al-Yahiz cannot commend even the dedicatee of his essay, for whom he otherwise has only praise. Quote, "I have examined your character, studied your nature, considered your qualities," he writes in the preface, "and I have seen that you are approaching perfection, nearing the ideal, having raised yourself on the scale of virtues, being almost without equal. Nonetheless," he adds, "I have noticed that you are on the path of wastefulness and negligence, on account of two things that are the foundation of the practice of virtue." For the dedicatee, the intended reader of the guarding of the secret and the holding of the tongue can do neither. The difficulty, in truth, exceeds that of the control of the organ of speech. Even when a tongue can be disciplined into immobility, secrets can be discerned, for the body, mute guardian of the unsaid, will evoke what has not been named. Quote, "If the most judicious and prudent person held his tongue, locked up his secret, and measured his words," Al-Jahiz reasons, "still," quote, "without violent effort to control himself and his gestures in every instant, he would not be able to master the glance of his eyes, the muscles in his face, the change of his color, his smile or frown. When someone evokes that secret, or he thinks of it, he will not be able to keep his face and his expression from betraying him when someone mentions his secret, or something like it, or something that recalls it, or even when he meets someone interested in it. A secret can be known in these and similar ways, for it can be tracked down by the skill of hunters armed with guesses and conjectures, by careful investigators of words and deeds, and by the study of motives and symptoms. Sharp eyes and ears know how to read what is not written." Quote, "Sometimes there are doubts about something. One glimpses the truth. One needs no more to outwit the owner of the secret. It suffices to speak to him about a part of the matter, making him believe that it has been spread and become generally known. Then he will be led to confirm the suspicion and make it into a certainty. He will explain it all in detail, thus condemning and destroying himself." One might imagine that the risk run at such times were simply that of communicating facts, deeds, or beliefs that one might rather wish to conceal. But the threat of divulgation is considerably more dire, for in being disclosed, a secret changes nature. Its unveiling is its deformation and destruction. When a secret has gone beyond the breast of its master and escaped from the tongue to a single ear, it is by that time no secret. It becomes a different thing. At worst, it is the cause of private shame and scandal. At best, it passes into the discourse of another, namely information. Al-Yahiz goes so far as to remark that to make a certain matter quickly known, there is no more reliable method than to present it as an object of concealment. Quote, "Indeed, one of the best means to disclose a secret is to extort a promise from a confidant, warning them against its divulgation, because the prohibition stimulates desire, imposing a constraint, and it is unpleasant to be submitted to a constraint. This is all the more so given that the soul, excited and agitated, loves to pour itself out and reveal itself." Shall we have a stop there, or just carry on? It's not very further to the end.
Can I just want to make just an observation? Talking to the you is like telling the bees. I was just thinking about bees, the English.
There's an expression.
Practice. No.
Tell it to the bees.
Told the bees of somebody's birth or death, or some secret that they couldn't otherwise reveal to anybody else. So they went to beehive to tell the bees.
Yes, but I think you can talk with the bees.
Well,
I mean, it's just a question of time, and even now the languages of so many are much more known.
Yeah.
So he is using it as a metaphor of talking to someone who doesn't understand the language, your language.
Yeah, but maybe, I mean, you're saying maybe it isn't a metaphor.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But it's
because the people, the old women who went and told the bees,
Well, clearly, yeah.
They didn't think it was a metaphor.
No, that's true. Clearly, I mean, when he says, when he refers to information, that the telling of the secret transforms the secret into something else, which is information. I find that very interesting, since we are in the so-called information age, and it reveals why this text is written. You know, Daniel Heller-Rosen comes from the Italian autonomia operaia thinking, and therefore he's coming from the idea of strike and to not produce knowledge in knowledge capitalism is part of the background of why this is written, certainly. But, you know, there's a question around the elite here that might be interesting to discuss. I mean, how is there's something very elite also about deciding to withdraw speech and communication in an age of the global flow of information. I mean, it could be seen as an act of some sort of an elite. In Germany, I think there was a slight accusation, I remember at the time of this, by some people of the secret society, of building a secret society, a kind of intellectuals making a secret society, and is that not tremendously anti-democratic? And so I remember there was a discussion around that problem.
It's like gagging orders with a revelations about affairs. So you have these, I can't remember what the term was, super injunctions.
Super injunctions, yeah. But I mean, one of the things that came up at the very beginning of these forms of social networking, things like MySpace, you know, things that preceded this, the Facebook, etc., is this everything you put on Facebook, everything you do now on the internet, is being tracked and tabulated for the purposes of maximizing the chance of somebody selling you something, which is how the economics work. At the same time, everything you've done that, despite the death of your hard drives and the disks, etc., apparently is there forever. In some sense, it's retrievable. So there's been a whole lot of work about this question about privacy in public and the kind of compulsive self-revelation that leaves no order of secret and public, you know, secret and not secret. And then we have a whole forms of journalism in which people are encouraged to thrive on the paparazzi of every kind of possible way of prying into certain kinds of lives. And then, as Pam says, if you have enough money or power, you can take out a super injunction, which almost rather like a kind of Freudian fetish marks the spot to something, you know, which somebody's going to try and get behind, but judiciously. Whereas, I think there's some very, very profound change that has overtaken us between what might be kept close, so it's not a secret of state, but something that has a kind of should not be public, should not be published, and now everything's, you know, from, you know, every level. And I mean, all these kids who've got caught where, you know, their partners say, you know, do a sexy sort of video, you know, webcam thing, etc., and then it's right, you know, out. And it doesn't make any sense to me that people simply say, okay, well, I just won't do it. You know, this is, but it's now a culture that you can't.
What do you mean you just won't do it? You
just choose not to ever put anything,
yes,
not participate in it. You can.
Yes,
I don't know how long it's going to. You could survive resisting, withdrawing from it.
I think that's a good question. But for example, I'm not on Facebook. I never was on Facebook. There's a fake me on Facebook. Somebody made. I don't know who it is. So there are a lot of. There's Ivana Blasuk is not on Facebook. There are a lot of people of our generation and also young kids. My daughter got off of Facebook, even though she doesn't own what is already there, but that belongs to Facebook. But there is a movement of moving away from this obligation to upload every instant of one's life, make it public.
Again, are we talking secrets here?
The creation of secrets.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I haven't looked it up, but is there a difference between privacy, a private life, a private existence, and a secret? Because he's stressing very much as you just said, the holding the you and the non-you, or but yourself. And as soon as you release something, and that may be a kind of a private context or a family context, it's not a secret anymore. It may be still part of your private life, but it fundamentally has to do, I think, with the I, with the self, or one person only. Isn't that?
Is this in German? Secret is Geheimnis.
Geheimnis. Yeah.
And doesn't it relate to prison? No, the word doesn't have any.
No.
What is the etymology of Geheimnis?
I don't.
Well, secret.
I don't know, but for me, when he gives this quote, a secret can be known in these and similar ways, for it can be tracked down and so on and so forth. So it has to do with some sort of effect or some kind of inner.
Well, it can be of many sorts. It can be political. It can be it can be how to make it can be many things. It doesn't have to be a personal, private, embarrassing thing. I think secret in Italian or in English comes from segreto, which means secret, but it's of the same etymology as sacred and as separate. To separate, to secret, and the sacred are all connected etymologically. Mm-hmm. And also to sacrifice.
Of course, the German Geheimnis has the Heim in it, which is home. Mm-hmm.
So to keep home, Geheimnis, to keep inside the home.
But I'm a bit reluctant to open it too much to. It may be a political secret that you own, that you hold, but I'm drawing the line too narrow here. I don't know, but I think there is a difference between broader kind of political. I don't know. I don't know how to name it at the moment. It's.
Well, the question of private, public.
Privacy and publishing.
Yeah.
And actually, what's something, which is, as Rosen is saying, is that it can only be a secret by remaining secret.
Yes.
Mm.
Therefore, a revealed secret is no longer a secret.
Yes, it's information.
So it's a very particular kind of knowledge that has to be sort of, in a sense, held.
Yeah.
But what he's also saying is all these images of the body are never
Yes.
able to hold it. The breast is full.
Mm-hmm. The tongue. It's very embodied.
And then something is going to betray, perhaps, obviously, what it is, not just the pressure of it. So I maybe have been distracting you with the question of...
No, of the public and the private, the Facebook. No, I think it's a very pertinent question, actually.
To speak
about, he is clearly looking at an author who's attributing value to not providing information, to not giving information. He's
giving something away so that it may become information.
Yeah, to not doing that. He's establishing, he's speaking against the dominant paradigm of access and accessibility, which is supposedly synonymous with democracy. Democracy is if things, you have access to them. So you immediately speak about the politician sex scandals. I think that the society wants, I mean, that's just my view. My view is that the Western advanced society, which is all over the world as well, wants us to give value to accessibility and to providing information. So when the politician has a scandal and the politician is stopping that, it's used to structure and to strengthen our desire to believe in accessibility as a mark of democracy. Oh, look how bad he's not telling of his sex scandals. Well, actually, industry and global financial capitalism doesn't give a hoot about the sex scandal of so-and-so. And they would like, I mean, it would encourage people to be outraged by politicians or wealthy people stopping information, because what is needed is that we, by the system, is that we continue with this transparency of continuous access, as if this continuous access brings democracy, while it actually brings selling more products, because you have access to the person's tastes, to the person's desires and wishes and the books that they've read. And so I think that he's in a bit of an Italian battle, post-autonomia operaia battle, against this idea of access. Indeed, if you look at it from an art perspective, so-called access and accessibility has made it impossible to exhibit so many artworks of the 70s and 60s. For example, Cunelis's fire for health and safety regulations, or certain things. If you don't, I have tons of stories of access problems that because of the need to have complete and utter access by everyone, you often cannot do certain artworks. You just can't do them because there's no, if the artist wants to do it in a small room at the top of a tower where only one person at a time can go and wheelchairs can't have access and so on, then you as a curator are an elitist, you're bad, you're da-da-da. You can't spend public money to have that artwork happen. And so what is the measure of the goodness of it is accessibility. Same with the impulse to have wall labels everywhere. It all has to do with this obsession with accessibility. I can argue the opposite as well, because I do believe in wall labels. I mean, I had wall labels in dOCUMENTA, and I do believe in wheelchair access. I mean, for me, the mark was, can Ryan Gander get in this installation or not? You know, and sometimes he'd say, listen, I can just leave the wheelchair there and I'll just crawl up the stairs. I said, okay, then it should have happened. If you say that, if you want to do that, and you say that it should have happened, but it's not going to happen, Ryan. But so one can argue both sides, but I think this is what this is part of. It's part of a discussion of recovering the notion of secret, taking it away from the extreme right. Because the secret has been taken over by the esotericism of extreme right aesthetics in the politics in the 20th century. So how can we reclaim the space of withdrawal, of retreat, of inaccessibility as a space of potential? I think that's what's going on in this, as in, for example, Pamela Lee's text about illegibility and the celebration of the handwriting of Meyer Shapiro that you can't really read, and also in my own interest in the notebooks of people, the text before the texts are written, the beauty of the notes that are not yet constituted knowledge, because a non-constituted knowledge cannot really be PDF'd. I mean, it can be PDF'd, but it cannot be summarized clearly into a pill and it transformed into, it resists, you know, like a text that resists. So, as do the language of the bees also kind of resist. But I don't know if this is the objective of the... What I find interesting is how it ends. It ends before the text actually starts. And I remember writing to Daniel and saying, I think you should add a conclusion, or you should add something. There's something missing in the text. And he said, no, that's exactly what I want. So it's as if it was the introduction to a text. It's not there. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Let's finish it, because I think there's something developing here which you just introduced with the coming back to the retreat and withdrawal as these particular kinds of sort of ethical political positions in the face of some of the elements of our contemporary world which are revealed by the retreat and withdrawal, as opposed to becoming invisible when we're just bathed in them and participating and thinking. Okay. So, where was it?
The arts.
Okay. Okay. The arts of guarding a secret and holding one's tongue would be of only moderate significance were it possible to delimit the domain of hidden things. I'm going to read that again. The arts of guarding a secret and holding one's tongue would be of only moderate significance were it possible to delimit the domain of hidden things. For one could then restrict oneself to practicing the two skills of speech in those circumstances in which matters of a certain nature are best left unsaid. Yet the truth is that everything and anything may need to be hidden from view. Details of an intimate nature are not the only ones that one may wish to conceal.
Speaking of private, public.
Quote, the divulgation of a secret is to be guarded against in all things. Extraordinary news, lofty affairs, mysterious reports, scandalous facts. For example, religious secrets should be protected, lest passion take hold, and the adepts of religions come to hate one another, opposing and confronting one another on account of divergences concerning such matters. Against enemies, one must also conceal royal secrets involving veiled plans, hidden ambitions, and mysterious projects. Then there are the secrets of the great and the mighty of the elites, which must also be concealed. For commoners place the greatest importance on their kings, who are a sky overshadowing them, to which their eyes are raised and their hearts pinned and their desires and fears turned. Then finally, there are the enmities between brothers. End quote. The potentially limitless realm of things to be kept secret implies a single yet far-reaching consequence. Al-Jahiz himself refrains from drawing it. Since there is no matter, whether individual or collective, psychological, political, or doctrinal, that might not one day need to be concealed, there is no speech that might safely lie beyond the reach of the essay's admonitions. In every act of language, regardless of the situation and the subject, there may be a secret thing that demands to be guarded. One may need to hold one's tongue. Whenever speaking beings converse with one another or with themselves, matters may be withheld or revealed. What is more, they may be withheld as well as revealed, at least to those who know how to listen and to look. In this sense, despite the modest terms with which the author introduces it, the guarding of the secret and the holding of the tongue offers far more than teaching on two skills. Subtly, if imperceptibly, it hides the fact that it bears on language in all its forms.
Excuse me, what are the two skills?
Holding
the tongue and and what? And the breast, maybe?
The act of guarding the secret and holding one's tongue.
Oh, guarding the secret and holding
one's tongue.
It says at the beginning, how not to speak at the wrong time, how not to use the secret or divulging.
Two skills, that's it.
Okay.
How not to speak at the wrong time, that's the two skills, sorry. Yeah, how not to speak at the wrong time, and how not to lose a secret by divulging it. Okay.
So one might also take a step further, or a further step, turning from things meant by speaking beings to that by which they at once protect and betray themselves. Al-Jahiz, to be sure, limits his reflections to matters that one can conceal, and that one ought, for this reason, to keep under lock and key. On the subject of the repository of all human secrets which no one owns, the author holds his tongue.
That's very interesting, because that brings in the question of the commons. The commons, what Lewis Hyde is discussing in his essay and so on. The commons meaning all that cannot be owned by any single individual, and whether it be like air, oxygen, or intellectual commons. Like there was a strong debate before copyright was actually defined in its current terms, like you have to be 70 years after the death of the author for it to be out of copyright and so on. So there is, and the battle's going on for now for building the commons. There is so much part of what the artists are doing, activist artists are doing all over the world, and in Kassel in the dOCUMENTA we're very much discussing what are the commons that cannot be privatized. You know, how can we define these commons? Are they common goods? Are they intellectual common goods? Are they? That's another text that we can also read tomorrow or later today if we have time. The Lewis Hyde text about the commons, where he goes against Marcel Maus's simplistic view of the question of exchange and gift economy to a more current maybe vision of what the commons might be. Commons are also on the internet. They speak of, you know, like for example, software that's not private, you don't have to buy, that's part of, and a wiki commons where you can get photographs that to use in your publications for free that are out of copyright that people donate to wiki commons. And so, but I think that this is a reference of Daniel to that question of the repository of all human secrets which no one owns. The subject of the repository of all human secrets which no one owns. Because somehow, sometimes I think the question of autonomia is that if something is divulged, it will then be privatized. So if you map the genetic code of a species, a plant, you get the DNA sequencing of a type of rice, then you can claim that you own it. You know, like Monsanto patents, doesn't only develop seeds, but patents existing plants with a small change in one chromosome that doesn't make any difference, and therefore saying that that's a new breed of rice. So it's the divulging of the secret of the genetic code of food causes the loss of the commons of that food, for example. So it's a big interesting question of how here withdrawal of information can actually protect the commons. The way, you know, if you didn't have a, what do you call those, theodolite, that was developed also in Kassel many centuries ago and by other companies, colonialism would have been rather different, you know, because it's the theodolite that allows that instrument, the theodolite, that strange instrument. How do you pronounce it? Theodolite, that allows you to actually make the map of the landscape, because you see it, you map it, and then you can own it. You can draw the lines around something. So this relationship between that technical instrument and colonialism is, in the history of colonialism, is huge. You know, I think the first theodolites were in the late 1500s, and you lose the commons, you know, by revealing the secret of how to make the map of the terrain, for example. This is, it can be seen as romantic.
No. I'm making a connection with Kuli's. I'm making some connections between the two films we've looked at today, and this issue of, on the one end, witnessing and testimony, which is to some extent about calling people to speak, but not for the purposes of revealing, but for the purposes of sharing, and thus allowing things to become part of a common world. And I suppose it links up with Levena's question at the very beginning about
rendering not invisible, or
and
removing
the
invisible.
conditions under which certain things can be seen and heard against cultures which render things invisible and inaudible. And that, I mean, so that's that kind of struggle around witnessing, bearing witness, making sure that it doesn't escape from people's collective knowledge.
Yes, making the film Nuit et Brouillard.
Yeah.
And this opposite problem of the advanced digital age of cognitive capitalism, where somehow that revelations is also for the purpose of property rights.
But that, yes, that,
it brings the opposite result.
And then in between you have the film of the Vietnamese artists who were talking about making visible in a certain way, in terms of witnessing the presence and the lives of, and indeed perhaps the deaths of the fighters, at a point at which they themselves speak of, we only had pencils and pens and paper, and the other side had cameras. They didn't need to have embedded artists, they had cameras. So there's a kind of transitional moment to then what Ravi Moir is dealing with. We've got this unbelievably elaborated kind of image culture of exposure, which then you're bringing in autonomia, reminds us of what is become invisible in all of this.
With all that visibility.
Which is this, you know, there is an economic structure. There is the hugest secret that we are living with, that we don't, you know, we can no longer discuss. I mean, I still find this, we can, you know, when I first started teaching, you know, started teaching a social history of art and sort of teaching with Marx and, you know, going through something which had this kind of weight of theoretical discussion, and it also came with a kind of decolonization theorists, you know, who were drawing on Marxism, etc. Whereas now you say capitalism, and it's like it goes over people's heads, and it's so, you know, it used to be unspeakable. I mean, the minute I would say capitalism, all the students said, "Oh, she's a Marxist for sure," you know, they would click off, right? Whereas now we talk of it because it's so penetrated. It's no longer this sort of unspeakable secret revealed by socialist or Marxist discourse. It is just the reality, and yet we live in it without it kind of knowing, you know, what you're saying, what's behind, you know, where are the folders, what's behind
what's beneath the surface.
We know is real bodies in real labor in real conditions whose factories fall down on their heads because of the net rates of exchange, or as you say, with the miners whose ground falls on them in order to produce the energy for the industrial...
For this to work.
For these to work, and also for these to be made, etc. And it's that, so I'm kind of, I know this is a bit too elaborate, but there's a difference, you know, here there is a kind of sense in which something is secreted, which means in English both something that is made secret and hidden, but something that, like an, you know, we secrete from our glands. You know, we leak. We leak, but the sort of
secretions.
The secretions of capitalism are in our pores, and we aren't doing it at the same time as we don't grasp the knowledge. We don't live with the knowledge of the world that shapes us. We have the words for it. We say them. And that's why, in some sense, some of the artworks are so important, because they just show tiny little bits in these very complex sort of moments that when you put them together, you begin to have a different, I think that's what Roy is saying about making us think differently.
And it kind of feels like it's the opposite of, I don't remember your name, sorry, what you said, Levena said earlier, and that is making the connection between something that came up, I think, at the first Leverhulme about the, and I've forgotten what the word is, but it was to do with Venice Biennale, and it was the outsider art, and the outsider art almost, this is what it feels like, but sort of being revealed and taken on board by the capitalist kind of thing and the commodification of that tipping of a secret that's been revealed and taken and transformed into something else. And I don't know quite, I haven't got any more words. But if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, nothing is invulnerable.
No, but that risk point, I think,
yeah.
Maybe it's that risk point of sharing something that's the secret of where it can be, which is why I was thinking that thing of things that are invisible, of that risk point of it becoming visible, what it might become, what it might be taken.
So sussunto. How do you say subsumed? Was the traditional word for that. Yes, when it becomes revealed, it can be subsumed. So we can go into the classic Marxist way of looking at subsumption of cultural artifacts and languages and so on, as before other goods. But I'm trying to follow this idea. I mean, the witness bears witness for the purpose of sharing and to bring visibility, for example, to atrocities, like, for example, Primo Levi writing his novel. And then a situation where the witness uploading or doing those videos, because one dies, 100 are not dead. They're just uploading all these videos of demonstrations, right? The 100 that are not dead think that they're doing, the thousands that are not dead, think that they're participating in bearing witness. And they're showing what's going on in this Syrian revolution. And they're going to tip the revolution and win because of this bearing witness, revelation of all the horrors of these soldiers. But he's looking at not the hundreds who don't get killed, but those ones who do get killed, and says, you can't do the revolution like that. You know, it's not the same result. You're not actually sharing, maybe, something that would remain invisible, like a tyrannic government oppressing their people, and that might not be the situation. The situation might be different, says Rabbi in the film.
But I think that there's another point I would just throw in, which is if we're going back to Agamben and the witness and Primo Levi. Okay, Primo Levi is, and the whole of the group who say they chose to try and live because someone must know that it is possible for this to be happening. And it's not that they're bearing witness to atrocity. This is, I think, one of the great things. They are bearing witness to something that this whole system, I mean, because that's the whole point about the totalitarian system, no one was going to survive to bear witness. No one would ever know that this has happened. And if that was possible, the rest of the world would be forever at risk. So it's not just, I saw terrible things, I must tell you I saw terrible things. The whole burden of the concentrationary discourse is we are witnessing something happening to humanity. And if we do not survive to tell you this, it will have happened. And humanity will never have any place from which to resist its potential destruction. Because this is this secret. So one has to understand, I mean, the concentration camps were not secret, they were visible, but
pretty kept secret. I mean, in a way.
The extermination camps were secret.
Yes. But that's what I meant. Yeah, but the economy of it.
But at the same time, the full dimensions of what was actually happening. So it's not, Primo Levi does not bear witness to atrocity. He bears witness to what is happening to human beings and how human beings live in when they are confronted with this in order to tell us. So this is, I think, one of the things that gets confused, that this is, the Allies showed photographs of atrocities and left us with the images of horror, whereas the witnesses are trying to tell us a deep political lesson. Okay, and that's why they want to survive, to tell us something. It's not well, in some senses, to refuse the secrecy with which this abolition of humanity was experimentally being undertaken. and that seems to me, interesting in relation to what we were understanding with the politics of Rabbi Moraes, which is that you can, because of this kind of connection and this other kind of world, you can think you are participating and by showing.
In bearing witness, yeah.
In bearing witness and showing, etc. But ultimately, the fragility of the human body, the vulnerability to the weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And that was also in the Din's piece.
Yes.
Since the extraordinary imagery of the shot eyes, whether he was shot and blinded, but it says you put your prosthesis up, but it's actually becomes the glinting light, which the
focus of the gun.
The shooter, what is he called? The
aim.
The sniper can see the glint, and then it's a beautiful channel to that. But it just all of those kinds of images become very powerful for me around what we are now come to think. So what is happening in places like Syria, what might happen in places like Turkey, what has happened in places like Egypt, where there was a revolutionary desire through all these mechanisms, which was, or even I think about Iraq after not this last elections, but the elections that brought Ahmadinejad back to power, when there clearly was a movement and it was crushed, however much we saw it and people tried to show it, because there is real power.
Yes.
And that power remains, in a sense, unseen by us, except when it, comes out of the sky, or those sorts of aspects. So I think that's one of the problems we have, and that's what he's saying. But the guns, the tank, and the body stand in this. The body armed with a phone has nothing to protect itself against the real of the armored violence.
Although the subject with that phone believes that he or she does. That's what he's saying. There is an illusion. That it's an illusion to provide visibility to what has been kept invisible will be sufficient. So that's the autonomia question, that that's why they were thrown out of the Italian Communist Party. Because they said the problem is not to change the ownership over the means of production. The problem is to get out of the notion that productivity is good, or is, that both capitalism and communism in the 19th century shared one very fundamental thing, which is a belief in progress and production. And Mario Tronti was the first to be thrown out, and he's the inspirer of all the others. That there's a need of a kind of liberation of the worker from work. So I think the conditions of post-war Italy were particular, this very rapid urbanization of a traditionally agricultural country, very poor, having come out of fascism and so on. I think the idea was you cannot make a revolution because the oppression is too big. It's impossible. It will never happen. So what you do is you don't break either the machines, that's the ludist way, you just opt out. You opt out. So these early ideas, which then became a little bit common in the late 60s in other places as well, with this sort of retreat of the hippie commune and so on, were developed in the 50s in Italy, Italian thinking, as this opting out. So they were considered very badly by also the Communist Party. Many of them went out. It was parallel to the polemic between abstract art and figurative art, because the Communist Party was in favor of, let's say, the Lukács realism, and in maybe, if more very avant-garde, Brecht. And the artists were Adorno people, so another kind of left, which would be more connected with the politics of form and the more Rancierian, if you want to go later. So an Adornian idea of the political task of the abstract avant-garde or of Schoenberg or whatever. So they weren't close to the artists, but I'm just saying these two things happen at the same time. Of all human secrets, which no one owns, the author holds its tongue, is the key to reading this text not as a kind of conservative, reactionary text, but as a kind of idea that the commons can only be built through forms of retreat and withdrawal.
Was comment made about the invisibility of the Vietcong?
Excuse me?
I haven't had a chance to read the Din, but I was just wondering if a comment was made about the invisibility of the Vietcong, because that was their... They were the victors, weren't they? And they were in their being underground and being able to...
Yes, the underground is so interesting. I'm glad you bring that up. And in the jungle. No, he doesn't bring that up in the interview, but I do talk in the interview about the vegetation and the alliance, which brings us to the world and the previous seminars and institutes, because he does speak about the alliance between the vegetation and the human, which is something that Pierre Huyghe's book speaks about a lot, the alliance. In order for the artwork to not be visible, to find invisibility in that dump of the compost area, compost heap, and to not be seen, he spoke about this alliance with the bees, that created the mask for the sculpture. It's interesting that it's a sculpture of a nude, because of course the representation of the female body in sculpture and so on and so forth. So in that interview, he does speak about we speak about this alliance with the vegetation as a form of, withholding, not of the underground tunnels, but of the vegetation as a possible alliance, which brings me to the fact that recently I've been thinking about Art Nouveau in the way that on the one hand, the line of Art Nouveau, of course, it has something to do with the development of the shift from the classical age, according to Foucault, to the historicism, whatever he calls it, the evolutionary, the period of seeing everything as something that evolves, which is dominant in the 19th century. So it does conform to this shift to the idea of evolution, of modernity. But at the same time, it's this complex kind of trellis that one takes this line on this journey, like a Tristram Shandy journey of Art Nouveau, I think is very much an interesting resistance. Liberty, in fact, means freedom from the idea of the archive and the linear progress, the straight line, or the archive folders that were the new dominant paradigm of the 19th century as well. So I see my interests. The other day I thought about it, that I was like analyzing my own work with Donna Haraway and so on. So there's something like Art Nouveau in this. I mean, there's this alliance with the plant, with the irruzione of the plant inside the body, that, as Deleuze talked about it. Deleuze too, Deleuze coming from Whitehead and so on, coming from Bergson and this whole thing of the organicism, might be a form of Art Nouveau now, in a way, if you can look at it later. And that's one way of seeing the line, that curvy line of the plants. So we talk about that. But the underground tunnels, I'm not sure everybody knows about this, but there were many, many, many tunnels dug by the Viet Cong, because if you're going to be throwing napalm on a forest, you better be underground to survive. So all along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which actually goes through Cambodia, most of it, but also to go from the north to to emerge in South Vietnam was trellised underground with tunnels, speaking about the miners and so on. And talking with them, I spoke with many of the Viet Cong artists about those tunnels. One of the men who's interviewed, his wife, he met her in a tunnel because she was a doctor. I met her. The one whose name is Huong Phuong something, I cannot pronounce correctly. But she would, all the doctors, all the medical facilities were underground. So they had, well, also the Nazis, we know, had underground hospitals in Jersey or wherever, you know, they had it all also underground because of aerial bombings, and we know also caves and so on have been part of the whole story of Osama bin Laden and so on. But anyway, they told me about these underground hospitals that were built and how she would operate at night. Well, not at night, it's always night, but with this miner's lamp on the bodies, and that whenever there was going to be like an air raid, you know, if they knew about the planes coming or the whatever with the napalm, they would go underground. And so the snakes, it spoke to me about eating snakes, a lot of snake for protein, and then emerging into this devastated, burnt landscape after, you know, like after 8 hours or whatever, to emerge, and then everything is just sizzling and devastated. And I remember also at the Mekong River Delta, which I visited, is now a little bit of a tourist attraction as well. There were very short trees, you know, and there was something weird acoustically. I couldn't understand. And I asked Din, I think, this question, because that's down in South Vietnam. Most of these artists that we met and visited were in Hanoi, still living in Hanoi. Only a few were living in Saigon. But he explained to me that it was the fact that the plants are quicker to repopulate and grow, yes, because of the roots underground, than the animal life. So there's huge areas where there's no birds, you know, or no all of the animal life that used to be there is gone. So you see a forest, but it doesn't sound like a forest. It's quiet. I remember this very strange feeling. But that's just to say that the underground tunnels, thank you for reminding me, because we were talking about the underground as a place not for, you know, that wasn't made for humans to go. I was thinking about the mining disaster in Turkey last week.
But tunnels and mines are different. Tunnels
Yes.
become the sort of just subsurface networks
Yes.
of roads and things. And I mean, they use them, you know, in so many places.
Yes, it's more like ants.
Yeah, it's not that far away. Whereas this thing of dropping people, you know, thousands of
shafts down the
miles,
shafts.
and you know, then making
That's
them walk
interesting.
and
So
go, which is how anybody,
It's a legend, isn't it?
yeah.
It's not a myth, is it? It's actually that was.
It's very interesting that.
Such a big part to their being victorious was that they could.
We'll just pop in the tunnel. They had tunnel manholes everywhere. So the mines are vertical descent, and the tunnel is like just under the crust. It's a kind of a network, a pattern of. It's very interesting. It's so interesting. Thank you for bringing that up.
And then you have them all over Gaza, for instance. I mean,
yeah, what's the situation?
In the Gaza situation, yeah, they have. I mean,
a lot of tunnels.
But that's how they survive, because
Really?
there's a siege.
Yes, of course.
That the Israeli army holds it and that controls anything that can go in on the land. But the way they're getting all their materials is in these tunnels that into Egypt. So every so often when Egypt closes the tunnels, then they really are start to cut off. But I mean, there's a complete set of highways.
That's so interesting.
And that's, I mean, there's a whole thing about the underground, the overground. Anyway, let's just finish this before we go. Let's see if we could. So this is what's set off, which was on the subject, the repository of all human secrets, which no one owns. The author holds his tongue. At the risk of peering into that guarded common coffer and imagining something where there is nothing, one can, however, pose this question: might language guard something of its own, hidden in everything that is said? Might there be a cryptic thing in speech, distinct from the many matters that one can also store in it? It is certain that, were such a thing to exist, it would be less a secret than a mystery. To employ the Arabic terms that Al-Jahiz knew well, it would be of the order not of a sir, a hidden thing that may be protected and disclosed, but of a ghaib, a thing in itself impenetrable to human reason. So there's an Arabic word that would be the order of a sir, a hidden thing that may be protected,
which is the
and
secret,
disclosed, and a khab, the
is
thing
the mystery.
in itself impenetrable to human reason.
The mystery.
The mystery. The secret of language would be neither of something nor of someone. No skill of speech, therefore, could master it, yet it would be discernible to the ear and to the eye, even as it accompanied all the motions of the tongue and pen, not least the one that brings them at the crucial moment to a halt.
And then I wrote to him, can you put a conclusion? He said no.
I'm very much reminded of affect. Speaking of affect, because he talks a lot about, human reason, impenetrable to human reason, discernible to the ear, to the eye, in terms of, gestures or tics or, whatever you show. And throughout, throughout the article, the affective kind of dimension of language, and it affects, of course, certain theories at least do not belong to, they pass through. So that's much more what I read into it, and I still would kind of not really contest, but question or challenge him in terms of the secrets. Speaking of the secret and then secrets, is it certified information that we're talking about already when we're talking about, political secrets? Because it has left already the one that is always more than one, but still in terms of, theory, but I understand, where he comes from and all the, the background that I don't have any knowledge of. But still,
I think the most interesting point of this last part is that he's moving from the notion of the secret to the notion of the mystery. So while the secret is something that a person can contain or reveal and hold or not hold, what he's speaking of as the unspoken part of language and the unspoken part which is common, which nobody can own, is the mystery. So the mystery would be the shared secrets of all that cannot be owned by anyone, but that are not revealed, that can be not revealed because they cannot be owned. So it's as if this whole text is an introduction to saying, I'm not going to write an essay about secrets and holding secrets. I'm going to write an essay about the notion of mystery as the commons. I think that's what this is actually doing. And now that I read it again in this last moment, and in this sense that, okay, now we're going to talk about Haib, and no, it doesn't. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to halt. And he speaks of this mystery which is common. It's interesting that you say affective, but I think he would not use affective, because affective brings to not the common but to the singular.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Mm-hmm. Because
you don't?
It's
okay, then maybe you're using the word as a common.
The commonality that affect brings us to, in terms of the
if
axis.
you're using it in that sense. I thought you meant like the affective dimension, how something affects me, or my non-reasonable part, which is affective. But if you're using it as synonym of what is in common and unrevealed, and by being unrevealed can remain in the sphere of the commons, then it's
not necessarily what's not unrevealed, but what pushes us to a certain kind of limit, a threshold, and makes us do things, which then puts us in relation to a larger I, or
yes, makes me think about also. I mean, I'm not a particular Talmudic knowledge person. I mean, I don't at all. But in general, in religions, there is something which is the mystery. I mean, in Christianity, for sure, the transubstantiation is the mystery. You know, how can that be the body of Christ and at the same time be this thing that I'm eating? You know, it's utterly bread and utterly body of Christ. In that kind of mystery of Christianity, first of all, there is a secret, which is the secret of basically incest. I mean, the fact that the Father and the Son, I mean, the mother is the mother of the Son, but also the wife of the father of the Son. I mean, it's a bit of a taboo situation that's told, you know, through the secret being hidden through the angel that flies. You know, this strange Immaculate Conception is like hiding a secret, which is that she has had sex with her father and made the Son, who is also the Father. So this incredible secret on an intimate level, scandalous secret, is a secret, but it becomes a mystery when that secret is also the secret of transubstantiation, that the Word is the Word is the chair, is the body, and the Word is eaten, and the Father is eaten. So, I mean, this thing is to do with sharing. I mean, what I mean is, you can see in all religions, obviously, a certain element which is not dogmatic, which is not immediately revealed, and which is withheld, and it has to do often with the question of sharing and the commonality and the common space, how to protect that common space. I'm not a I think we're going into theology here, but what do you? In Talmudic things, I don't know. But I was going to ask Griselda.
So, in a sense, what's the relation between the secret and the mystery?
Well,
how do you live
I don't
the
know.
relation
I mean,
between the secret and the mystery?
The mystery is the mystery of transubstantiation. The secret is the incest that is told in this way in the Christian
in the sense
religion.
of telling or withholding. I mean, in the sense of this
Both
text.
are withheld.
Both are withheld. Okay.
I mean, no one tells, oh, you could read the story of Christ as a story of incest in the family. Nobody tells you that. It's a secret which is not told. Mm-hmm. And then the mystery, which is not told, has something to do with language. As he said, it's of the order of language, but it's of the order of the space of the commons. It seems to, at least in Christian religion, be that space where things are shared.
Okay, so not
the sharing of the bread.
Yeah, not an individual secret, but
yes,
a common mystery.
About the common. It is the common. The space of the common is kept as a mystery.
Okay.
It is the mystery.
It is the mystery, right.
Because if you don't have it, if you somehow try to, for example, reveal the book of life, like you're going to figure out the DNA of everything and sequence everybody's DNA, and da, da, da. If you could somehow imagine a condition where the secret of the book of life were revealed, somebody would own it, or some corporation might own it. But of course, the book of life is much more complex, and now after 30, 50 years of genetics and knowing the DNA, we know that through epigenetics that what occurs between the genes and the dance that occurs between them is much more important than the actual DNA of something, and that causes changes, and it causes the DNA to change. So the mystery is pushed back. You know, no matter how much you can try to figure out the what is it called, the particle, the whatever particle in the collider in Geneva.
Is it the hadron?
Yes, in that collider, there's this pushing of this boundary of, you know, the secret of the universe with that. What's it called? The so-called the God particle, but it's
Bose.
Yeah.
Bose, what's
there remains. I mean, if you were to be able to figure that out, somebody would buy it, right? Own it. But you can't, because what goes on at the edge, you know, with string theory, it just pushes the problem further. So I think this question that he's saying is that the space of the commons, the space of the common, is this space of the shared, which is the mystery. What about in Talmudic stuff?
No, there's a confusion here between Kabbalah, which is in some religions, I mean, like Sufism in Islam and Kabbalah in Judaism, and then mysticism in Christianity. There's this notion that you have to go through a certain process to even begin to be allowed access to these other levels of mysteries, which I think. But I'm also thinking about slightly different things to do with more like, for instance, Australian Aboriginal nations have an idea of things that mustn't be.
Ah, yes.
You know, there's a sort of so that the elders know, and only the certain communities can keep, because if you don't pass it on, you don't know. So there's a wonderful. This is going back. There is a Talmudic story, which is, there's a rabbi, and he knows that when something terrible is going to happen, he has to go into the certain place in the forest, and he has to say a number of certain prayers, and he has to do certain things. But 100 years later, somebody knows the story of the rabbi who went into the forest. So there's some kind of terrible pogrom about to happen, so they go into the forest, and they sort of find the place where it's meant to be, but they can't remember the prayer anymore, right? And then, then the generation along this is sort of, they know they're meant to go to the forest, and they're meant to say a prayer, but they no longer know it. So there's this question of losing some kind of magical incantations and gestures that they kind of get eroded, so that the Aboriginal nations have this idea, no, you're going to, you can't risk that attrition, because we will never have this, this relation, which I think does come back to this difference between the secret and the mystery for me here is, and if I can just hold on to this for long enough, which is, so if the secret of language would be neither of something nor of someone, right? No skill of speech, therefore, could master it.
Yes.
Yet, it would be discernible to the ear and the eye, even if it accompanied all the motions of the tongue and the pen, not least the one that brings them to the halt. So there's always something that, in a sense, is there is a beyond that nothing can actually turn into an object of knowledge or an object of speech.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about, that the mystical traditions are an attempt to find forms of action, performance, ritual, or incantation where language isn't seen to be trying to say anything, but touch. So, I mean...
Yes, which brings us to the no concept of the dOCUMENTA. Yes, it brings us right back there.
Yeah, you're trying to touch on something which, I mean, everything we say, so whether it's in terms of political resistance to being appropriated and commodified, there is a resistance, but not knowing necessarily that you don't know what it is the other, but you know you have to withdraw or refuse, but also this idea that we can somehow touch things, and I think in some ways that's what makes what we're trying to talk about when people make art or we talk about art, is that we sense these little kind of moments where something touches on, not an ineffable knowledge, which is what the religious traditions say, and then they call it God or life or the spirit, but it is something a kind of a modesty we have to accept. Yes. And that language cannot always just be instrumentally used to, it's what you're saying about classification, grasping the word, archiving it, but in some way, even the whole elaborate system that you're introducing about entanglement and understanding generations, it is what you do when there is something you acknowledge is not in the order in which what humans have defined themselves to be can master, and yet we want to live beside it, touch, be touched by it, be entangled with it, recognize it, etc. But at the same time, my position still would come back to, which I think is where you started today, why did you do this one about withdrawing, etc., which is, and I suppose this is another, bracha question, is there are things that predispose us towards enabling us to take care of the other. But the point at which we decide we will do so requires us to be a subject. right? So if I say that again, so that on the one hand we're trying to make sense, what are the affects or the conditions under which we might be intending or inclined towards the life of the other. But that is not sufficient to make us able to make an ethical decision or a political decision, because that then requires us to be together in a certain kind of way. And I think that's one of the things we're really debating over this. What you've forced into the view, into the discussion, is all of these things that were outside of what was considered the ethical, your Levinas, it's the face, you know, or the political. What are we going to do? And it goes back from a way. It's something that there is a something that's going to have to be done, which might include fighting for freedom.
Well, I mean, the
but at
bees
the
could
same time,
disappear if we don't do something. So I'm actually making it broader. I mean, that it's just, I find it unethical that the subject, that the other has to be a person. It seems outrageous in 2015 to think that way. Exactly, that's not what the other is. Exactly. That if one can expand that attribution of
but you see, this goes back to Lebena's question in the morning, which I just keep holding on to, which is Levinas could not imagine, like so many, I suppose we'd have to say white men cannot, and Europeans particularly cannot imagine any places in which, even if those Levinas, you know, was Jewish and fled for his life, and so on, that there is a way in which the world does not allow the other to be other than the mirror of me.
Exactly.
Whereas what I think you're trying to say is the other can be not the mirror of me.
Yes.
But also I think some people are saying that.
But I'm not only saying that. I'm also refusing paternalism towards the other that is not the mirror of me. I mean, there is no reason why that bee or that dog should not be not this. Let me take care of you. I mean, I'm refusing the traditional ecological approach of those who talk about the Anthropocene as we have to take care of this planet, we have to protect it, protect animal rights, protect the plants, protect nature. There's such a hubris in that, you know. It's the hubris that was in David Hume speaking about we have to protect women, you know. They're not that bad, they have reason, we can protect them, take care of women. Or of the slave, or of, so this attribution of agency to not inanimate objects simply, I mean, it's not a question of, but the attribution of co-agency and co-responsibility, that there's a kind of respect of the agency of the so-called other in that encounter, that not only am I mean, that in the ethical subject can only understand itself if it understands itself as being also parlé par l'autre, you know, spoken by the other.
But is it possible that that move, right, from what you call the paternalist and all
human
that whole tradition and
paternalism,
all that things, which is that somewhere, this is very outrageous, but it's whose stories, whose voices, whose invisibility and unhearability, when it struggles to come to witness itself, allows us to begin to reorient that.
Well, I don't know,
so
but
I do think, I'm just
one.
going to finding my final plea, which is there's some elements within what has been this alliance of the othered others, in all the agonies of their, you know, hierarchies as well, to displace that.
Yes.
And without that,
exactly,
this certain tradition, from the Humes to the Levinas's, would never have been able to arrive at it. So that's why certain, I mean, feminism being one of them, but certain forms of resistance and certain witnessing are necessary for the reorientation of these sets of
exactly. So, and a shift of perspective to see those forms of resistance that may be a virus. It may be many forms. It may be how do you say, a melting of ice caps. It may be, there are many ways in which it may be if an atomic bomb explodes, there is a hell of a lot of agency going on in
the insects.
What's going to be, yeah, exactly. You know, and I mean, insects that have, as a form of resistance of life to the stupidity of this one species that wiped out a lot, in a very short amount of time, the planet is fine. You know, it takes like 50 years, the planet's fine. No humans and no bears and no snakes, but other forms that have been here for much longer than humans. And I mean, to me, just the fact that people don't want to acknowledge that the biomass of the humans on the planet is smaller than the biomass of ants and bees on the planet is outrageous, you know. Because, oh, sure, there's nothing, but that's a lot of biomass, you know. That's a lot of inhabitants on the planet, and there's a hell of a lot of. I mean, there would be no Earth if there weren't any worms. So that's a lot of agency. So there's a lot of thanking that needs to go on, you know, that there's simply earth there that we can put our little seeds of tomatoes in. There's a lot of acknowledging that we're a little bit like the bees, because thank God that somebody's been eating all that stuff and the worms, you know, and making all that soil. So I'm just thinking that this thing about the secret, I mean, the mystery, no, what is important to me, I would like to, from my point of view, to close on, is that what he's doing here in the last paragraph is saying that the mystery is not only something which is beyond the language and beyond, he's saying that it is that space of the common, that it is the space of the commons, you know, the space that cannot be owned. That's important because that is a political statement, you know. On the subject of the repository of all human secrets which no one owns, the author holds his tongue. That repository of all human secrets which no one owns is the ghaib, which is within language. And it's interesting because language is one of the commons. I mean, language is also one of the commons. So oddly enough, it's not a question of a kind of esoteric mystery that's beyond our grasp. It's also the mystery that is the core of what makes us a community.
Okay.
Interaction.